G'day, mate. 40 here. Now, if I were tuning into a show, I'd want the host like talking right away, like no more than a bed of, say, 5 seconds of music. And yet, I typically let that music run 30 seconds to 60 seconds while I get everything, prepared and ready. So why didn't I do that prep before the show started so that you didn't have to listen to that boomer news intro music for so long when you want my blindingly hot, spicy takes of what's really going on in Russia? Here's the news. Here are the views that the establishment doesn't want you to know. Let me give you the hot stuff that the New York Times won't tell you. Right? So if I was tuning into a show like this, I'd want the host to begin, bang, with his hottest, most spicy takes, his most anti-establishment perspectives. Because if I was tuning in to get the establishment point of view, I wouldn't be tuning in to someone like me. Like, I'd be tuning into the New York Times, The Daily. All right, I'd be tuning into CNN or even Fox News. All right, why would I go to an amateurish live stream, right, if I just want to get the establishment point of view? So come on, 40. I mean, all these things that I want from other people, I don't provide. I mean, I'd be sick of this. Like, if I was watching right now, I'd be sick of all this chin wagging, all this introspection, all these feels. Like, just bring me the gold. Right? And if I was going to tune into a show, I'd want the host to put in at least 3 times as much prep as the anticipated length of the show. So I don't usually do that. It's amazing how often the behavior that I expect from others, I don't provide, by myself. All right, PragerForce, guys. You tired of the woke mob infiltrating our schools and workplaces? Join our community of free-thinking high school, college students, and young professionals. Together, we use digital media to change minds, promote American values, America, and build meaningful connections with thousands of other patriots around the world. Wow, most of my life, I would have been thrilled to belong to PragerForce, but now in my old age, I'm thinking of starting 40 Force, where instead of changing the world, right, we will sit around and we'll introspect about how wrong we've been
hey, man,
on this or
do
that.
You know what this training is about?
Man.
Nope.
Hey, man.
I guess we'll find out.
Whoa.
Hello, and welcome to your diversity, equity, and inclusion training. First, I want to commend you. I understand that you now have 3 times as many Black women and transgender employees than you did in 2020. Well done. Now, let's remind everyone of our zero tolerance policy. Remember, any of the following is grounds for termination of employment: displaying American flags and pride of country, walking around without your pronouns, saying Merry Christmas or discussing God, not letting a person of color in front of you in line at the cafeteria. Now say it with me.
Black Lives Matter! Defund the police! Hate all men! Silence is violence!
Let's make sure that victims speak before oppressors, Stephen.
What does this have to do with selling computers?
Come on, guys. Join 40 Force. Okay, what else do we got here? Unlock your freedom, guys. Unlock your freedom. Join PragerForce. Would you like to receive SMS text messages for new video updates? Wow, this seems cool.
Do you feel alone because you love this country, believe in free speech, and refuse to be a part of the woke mob? Then you need to join PragerForce, PragerU's community for high school, college students, and young professionals under 35. It's free to join, and the benefits are endless. Join a network with thousands of free thinkers worldwide and make new friends just like you. Get access to exclusive events and meet thought leaders and influencers in the movement. Have you ever wanted to ask Dennis Prager for advice, meet Will Witt, or get to know people like Michael Knowles, Ali Stuckey, and Brandon Tatum? Well, now you can. Looking for a job at a great company? PragerForce members are first in the running for internships and full-time positions at PragerU. As a member, you might even get featured in a PragerU show. There are a lot of problems facing our country today, and PragerForce members are working toward a solution. Together, we take part in missions, like flying the American flag, supporting our law enforcement, and fighting critical race theory on campuses or in the workplace. By joining PragerForce, you can make a difference. Join today at PragerForce.com.
Wow, PragerForce. Feel the force. Feel it. Right. What the heck is going on in Russia? Enough of this silliness. So I really enjoy Peter Zeihan's videos. My question is, am I getting a cartoon version of reality, or am I getting something that's profound?
Peter Zeihan here, coming to you
Hey,
from
Peter.
Marshalltown, Iowa. This is my old middle school behind
How's
me.
it going, mate?
I was trying to bide my own business and have some personal time and attend a birthday party here in my hometown. But apparently there's a coup going on in Russia, so no rest for the wicked. Short version, it was over the course of the 23rd, 24th, and 25th, a guy by the name of Prigozhin, who is the leader of the Wagner paramilitary group, who has been an unofficial arm of the Russian military now for several years, has launched an arm in its direction. His troops have left their positions in Ukraine. They have moved into Russia proper. They have captured the city of Rostov-on-Don, which has a population of about 1 million. They're attempting to flip Russian troops to their sides. And the Russian government, Vladimir Putin himself, has declared Prigozhin to be a traitor and has called upon the military and security services to crush him. Prigozhin has said that the president is misinformed, but it's okay because we're going to have a new president soon anyway. As someone who very vividly remembers duck and cover drills and is very aware that the Russians have been aiming nuclear weapons at us my entire life, there's something just deeply hilarious about this. The trick here is to not blow anything too much out of proportion because there's a lot we don't know. So let's start with what is certain. Rostov-on-Don is the primary logistical and communications point for the Russian military in the entirety of the Ukrainian war. So first and foremost, the Ukrainians are making a lot of popcorn here and are getting very serious about their counteroffensive. Now, until this point, at least until the 23rd, the counteroffensive was not going particularly well. In any battle where the Ukrainians are facing off against the Russians, and the Russians only lose 3 times as many troops as the Ukrainians do, that's a battle that the Ukrainians have lost. They're at a huge material and demographic disadvantage, and they just haven't been able to achieve breakthrough. There are multiple lines of defenses that the Russians have built over recent months. It starts with minefields, and as you get further back, it's
Look, I don't like cartoons. I don't watch cartoons. I enjoy Peter Zeihan. This seems like pretty solid, strong analysis to me.
Tank barriers and trenches, and for the most part, the Ukrainians haven't been able to get through the minefields. So I don't want to call it a failed offensive. I don't want to call it a stalled offensive. But it's definitely not been going as much as well as they'd hoped. But on the 23rd, we saw 2 things. Number one,
but I was a rabid follower of Dennis Prager for decades. I voted for George W. Bush twice. I mean, I'm a sucker. Like any guru comes along, like I'm there to sign up. I mean, I'm an intellectual gigolo. I fall in love with every comely new idea that comes along. But ultimately, I stay loyal to none. Why am I so vulnerable to gurus?
Change in military strategy. The Ukrainians have gone from targeting command and control bunkers to targeting ammo dumps, which is something you usually do before a big push. And the Chogar Bridge in Crimea was hit by a few missiles to make the rail system completely impassable until repairs are done. Now, the Russians do have the technical capacity to do that, but it's going to be something that takes weeks, which means that there was this window in western Ukraine where the Russians in the western half of the front, from Melitopol west, were not able to function. And that provides an opportunity for Ukrainian forces. Now, I'm going to put all of that together now in a video from something that I was originally planning on posting before the coup started. So here's the Ukrainian section of that, and then we'll come back to the Russian section. We're now well into the 3rd week of the conflict, and the Ukrainians haven't achieved any sort of breakthrough. There's 2 main lines of defense that the Russians are trying to hold. The first is a series of minefields, and the second is a series of more strategic defensive emplacements like Dragon's Teeth and trenches. And the Ukrainians haven't really been able to get past the minefields to get to the real defenses yet. And what that means is they've just kind of been bogged down in attritional fighting. And because the Russians have an order of magnitude more industrial plant and reserves and at least a factor of 3 more population, any battle in which the Ukrainians are duking out mano a mano is not one that they're going to do well in. In fact, any battle where the Ukrainians only kill 3 times as many Russians as they lose in their own troops is a battle they've lost. So instead of seeing the dramatic breakthroughs that we saw in Kherson and Kharkiv last summer, it's been a slugfest, and it hasn't gone well. That said, a couple things. Number one, we're still early in the offensive. They're still probing for weaknesses. They're still going after command and control. And then second, in the last 96 hours, a few things have changed. First of all, 3-4 days ago, the Ukrainians shifted from using their missiles to target command and control systems to going after ammo dumps. And you would do that when you're getting to the next phase of the operation. You feel like you've broken up their ability to react, and now you're trying to not just to trick their forces, but make sure that the forces cannot actually get meaningful supplies. But the real issue happened the morning of Thursday, the 22nd of June, when the Ukrainians put some serious holes in a few supply bridges that are critical for Russian forces. And to understand the significance of that targeting shift, we need to look at a few maps. Here's our first map of the Ukrainian space. Nothing too exciting here. The red line is roughly where the front is. The Russians occupy the territory to the east and south of that line, and the yellow bars are where the Ukrainians have put their primary thrusts. Now, the one on the left there, that's the Zaporizhzhia front. The Ukrainians have been expected to go in that direction since the very beginning of this conflict, because if they can push down to the Sea of Azov, they can basically isolate the entirety of the southwestern front and Crimea, because not only would there no longer be a land bridge between Russia proper and Crimea, but the Ukrainians would be able to target the Kerch Strait Bridge directly. but they've had more success going further into the east because there are fewer defensive works. But still, in all these cases, you're talking about advances in the single digits of kilometers. No sort of strategic breakthrough where mobile Ukrainian forces can get in behind the Russians and isolate them and break them up and force strategic retreats and routes. Okay, here's a zoom in on Ukraine. The single most important thing here is, of course, the Kerch Bridge. An attack, unclaimed attack, we don't really know who did it, but either the Americans or the Ukrainians took out one of the spans of the Kerch Bridge last summer. Now, the Kerch Bridge has 3 lines to it, 2 two-lane road connections and 1 rail connection. The Ukrainians, Americans, whoever it happened to be, were able to take out one of those 2-lane road connections and start a series of fires on a rail car that was going by on the rail bridge at that time, which warped the bridge.
Okay, I don't know where you primarily get your news and analysis about what's going on in the Ukraine war, but what's better than this? I mean, where on network news or in the New York Times do you get more interesting, thought-provoking and commonsensical analysis than this? Now, he may be completely wrong, but if he is, he's got me conned. I'm convinced that this is good stuff.
And made it impossible to handle cargo. So no more trains in and out of Crimea from this route. It used to be the primary route, and only 2 of the 4 road lanes. So everything has to go on truck, and when they do have convoys coming or going, they have to shut it down to other traffic. So that was a big hit, and it forced the Russians to shift their supply route over to this area, to the land connections that go into Crimea. So let's zoom in there. Now, first thing to understand about this area is a lot of this is not land. This entire zone here is a series of brackish lakes, which obviously you're not going to be running cargo across. In fact, there's only really 2 ways to cross. On the left, you've got the proper land connection, which is an all-land route that goes through southern Ukraine. It is the furthest connection from the front. It's not that the infrastructure there doesn't work, it's just that it's not great. However, if you go to the yellow arrow, the one further to the right to the east, you're looking at the Chonhar crossing. Now, Chonhar has a rail connection and a road connection. And it's these connections that the Ukrainians put some holes in. They use a special kind of warhead, which I'm not going to go into detail because it's not my focus, but it blew all the way through the concrete, blew all the way through the rebar, put a giant hole right in the middle of the thing. You're not taking trucks across that. You're not taking rail across that until such time as these are repaired. Repairing it is not beyond the capacity of the Russians, but keep in mind that it's been months since Kerch had that hole put in it, and the rail connection there has still not been rebuilt. One of the many, many downsides of the Soviet dissolution is we've had a simultaneous education crisis and demographic crisis now decades in progress. The technical education system in Russia collapsed back in the 80s, and their demographics, well, they've had a death rate that's been higher than the birth rate for 30 years now, which means that the youngest suite of people who have the full skill set to be technical experts, they're in their 50s right now. They'll turn 60 this year on average. They still haven't replaced the span and Kerch. They still haven't replaced the rail system. There's a question as
Wait, so is he saying that Russia just doesn't have enough people with expertise and education to be effective?
to whether they can. Now, the Chonhar crossing is not nearly sophisticated. Instead of being a high elevated suspension bridge, it's a low block bridge. It's not blocking navigation or anything. This is not a navigable waterway system. They probably can do it, but it's going to take them a few weeks, which means in the meantime, any cargo going to and from Ukraine has to come from that western bridge. And this means that the soldiers in Ukraine, the Russian soldiers in occupied Ukraine, are facing a double bind. Back to this map. Notice the city of Mariupol. Basically, any Russian troops that are west of that zone have basically been cut off from supplies that come from Russia proper off in the east. They got everything they needed from Crimea, which is, more difficult to support now. And now with the Chonhar Bridge offline, it's going to take about a week for the Russians to reroute everything further west and then cross a larger distance chunk of territory. That would suggest to me that the Ukrainians are as ready as they can possibly be to make a push in that direction. Now, coming down from Zaporizhia, it doesn't really matter where they penetrate as long as they reach the Sea of Azov. It could be east of Mariupol, it could be west of Melitopol, it could be anywhere in between. Any way that they can cut that land bridge forever and then have the range in order to hit the remains of the Kerch Bridge direct. If we're going to see an attack, if this counteroffensive is going to really manifest as something, these are exactly the circumstances you would expect the Ukrainians to shape, and now they've done it. And since there's going to be a window before the Russians can redirect supplies further to the west, the troops in the Melitopol area are now completely cut off, vulnerable. They're not going to get reinforcements. They're not going to get fuel. They're not going to get artillery shells and ammo. Now would be the time. Now, that's the strategic picture that we're seeing right now. Okay, now back to the Russian side of things with the coup. Rostov-on-Don is the primary jumping off point for Russian forces into Crimea and the southern front. And
Peter Zeihan released this video 24 hours ago. So he's not up to date with the seeming ending of the Wagner Group coup. And join the tsunami of viewers. We got 7 right now watching us on YouTube. We've got 1 person watching us on Rumble. We got 1 person watching us on Twitter. 1 person watching us on Facebook. 2 people watching us right now live on Odyssey. We are going out spreading the gospel to the entire world.
As long as Rostov-on-Don is offline, it is impossible for any Russian forces anywhere in the Crimea or in occupied Ukraine to reinforce, to get more troops, to get equipment, to get fuel. So this is beyond a golden opportunity for the Ukrainians to give the Russians a serious drubbing. The question is, how long will it last? While there have been many, many reports saying many, many, many things, there is no sign of direct large-scale fighting between Wagner forces and Russian forces at the moment. But the Wagner forces are definitely in command of the logistical train on which the entire Russian army in Ukraine depends. And in that sort of situation, wonderful opportunity for the Ukrainians. Okay, next chunk, we're going to go into some of the stuff that's going on in Russia proper.
Okay, good stuff. All right, that's good stuff, isn't it? That wasn't just something that felt like good stuff. That was the real stuff. That was fair dinkum, right? That fair dinkum analysis.
Still here, same day. You're going to hear a lot of crazy stuff out of Russia over the next several hours and several days.
Okay, but not from Peter Zeihan. He's not going to give us anything crazy, right?
You're going to hear that Prigozhin is having conversations with military commanders. You're going to be hearing stories about military commanders flipping sides. You're going to be hearing about defections within Wagner itself, of people going the other direction. You're going to hear about...
No, actually, what we heard is that Prigozhin had given up, reached a deal, and left the country. So none of what Peter Zeihan says we're going to be hearing have we heard.
Assassination attempts on all sides. You're going to hear about the Chechens siding with Prigozhin and Wagner or against, or you're going to hear about them going home. You're going to hear about the Russians blowing up bridges on the way to Moscow so Wagner can't make it. You're going to hear about forces gathering along the way. You're going to be hearing about airstrikes on Prigozhin because Wagner is so terrifying that the Russian military doesn't want to engage. You're going to hear lots of stuff.
I don't think we heard any of that stuff. Please correct me if I'm wrong.
Some of it will even be true. Most of it won't. The problem here is that we are in an information vacuum, or something worse, that it's been filled with misinformation. So a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, there is no free press in Russia. There hasn't been for 20 years. That was one of the first things that Putin did when he took over. He removed all the satirical shows, he removed all the news shows, he removed all the investigative shows, and it became basically a one-man government and a one-state propaganda system that has become more and more and more intense, especially since the onset of the Donbass war back in 2014. So official news channels are limited, and any time a Westerner tries to get in there to do some reporting, the Russians tend to arrest them on...
And, I mean, our official news sources are excellent, man. Those poor Russians, they're really suffering. If only they had the equivalent of Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC.
Drug or sedition charges. And in fact, you've got a number of high-level journalists that are in jail right now awaiting trial and or execution. So the normal methods of getting information are thin. Folks like me, especially since 2014, have really relied on Twitter because it's basically crowdsourced information.
Okay, so whether you're getting the news in the United States, France, Germany, England, Russia, China, what you're getting usually is the product of bureaucracies with access to grind. And then they release information, reports, laws, analysis that is then picked up and packaged by the mainstream media, who package it in as sensational fashion as possible, depending on their particular audience, trying to attract as many eyeballs as possible or as many subscriptions as possible to send these reports and analysis and leaks from bureaucracies.
And there was always a battle between the Russian bots and the Russian trolls on one side and the people who were trying to get information out on the other. And when we got to the start of the war in February of last year, the bots and the trolls just went away because a lot of governments and a lot of institutions, including Twitter, did a big crackdown on Russian misinformation. But then Elon Musk took over the operation, and in the time since, he has pushed down, they had the algorithm push down the relevance of anything involving Russia and Ukraine, so it's actually below things like vaccine misinformation, election misinformation, in terms of what gets brought up to the top. He's banned, or shadow banned, a huge number of accounts that I used to depend upon for knowing on what's going on in Kiev and Moscow.
Okay, we got corrections coming in through the chat. Bridges blown, Chechens involved, attempted airstrikes on Wagner column. All right, thank you for correcting me.
And most importantly, he's allowed the bots and the trolls to come back in force. So there's easily 2, maybe even 3 times as many bots and trolls from Russia on Twitter today. Not just that these are sources of misinformation, they're not all on the same side in this coup. Some of them are vitally ultranationalists, and they tend to side with Prigozhin and Wagner. Others are clearly employees of the state. And so now Twitter has become an utter shit show of these various factions, misinformation factions, trying to shout each other down about what's going on in Russia. I don't really believe any of them. And so confirmation in this sort of environment just takes forever because, if you don't get live video, it's really hard to confirm if something's actually happening. And now we've got Elon and Putin and Prigozhin all with their own narratives of what's going on and keeping track of.
Wait. We don't really know what's happening unless we get live video. Really, is live video the best epistemic source of truth? I'm skeptical of that. I mean, I know from my study of the Torah, guys, that the eye is the most superficial organ. Does not the Torah command us, do not follow your eyes, after which you will prostitute yourself? So I'm a little skeptical of this idea that live video is the best, most unimpeachable source of truth. It's the most immediately, viscerally compelling source of truth. But I would say, accurate analysis and accurate reports, even if they're delivered via written word or spoken word without live action video, may very well be superior epistemic sources of truth.
It's just going to be a nightmare. Now, this will sort out over the next several days as the reality of events on the ground overtakes the propaganda machine, and things are moving very quickly. And all of those things that I outlined at the beginning of it, those are all feasible outcomes, but obviously they can't all happen at the same time. So I will do my best to parse through them. I will try to lead with the things that I have confirmed, just like I did in the first video of this series. But it's going to be really, really messy, and there's no way around that. One more thing about the propaganda side of this. While we have a good idea of which side the trolls are on, which side the bots are on, there's all of Russia's disinformation channels internationally that are all of a sudden up in the air. So, like, what's going to happen?
Yeah, because only Russia employs, bots and trolls. All right. So if you see any bots and trolls and propaganda out there, it solely comes from Russia. The United States would never engage in such things.
To Hungary's Viktor Orban, who has basically become a pro-Russian shill within the European Union. Is he in favor?
Is Viktor Orban really a pro-Russian shill within the European Union, or is he doing the best he can in a very difficult situation? Hungary's future lies with the West, but Russia's right next door. I mean, it's like mocking Switzerland for being Nazi shills during World War II. Switzerland was between a rock and a hard place. They had to get along with both the Nazis and the Allies during World War II. They were in an impossible situation. They did the best they could in very trying circumstances that, thank God, I don't think any of us have ever experienced. So those of us who don't have a lot of real world responsibilities, we should probably be humble before lecturing those with real world responsibilities, the lives, the quality of life of millions of people in your hands, such as what Viktor Orban has or what the leaders of Switzerland had during World War II. It's very difficult to be between two implacably opposing forces.
Of Putin holding on to control, or does he like a more militaristic Russia because it would be more of a foil to be used in the European Union? What about people like Tucker Carlson, who have gone in hook, line, and sinker with the Putin side of things?
Really, is Tucker really hook, line, and sinker with the Putin side of things? Or is he hook, line, and sinker skeptical of how there is essentially only one narrative being presented to us by official sources, one narrative coming from establishment sources, one narrative coming from our foreign policy establishment, only one narrative coming from our leading writers and thinkers, and that is the moral imperative that we must support Ukraine, even if it means risking World War III and nuclear annihilation. Okay, so emotionally, I'm 100% on the side of Ukraine. Rationally, I don't think it's in America's best interest, Europe's best interest, Ukraine's best interest for us to be providing weapons to Ukraine. Russia's going to take those parts of Ukraine that are predominantly Russian speaking, and I don't think there's anything the West or Ukraine can do to stop that. So I am not for arming Ukraine, and that doesn't make me pro-Putin or anti-Putin. What I am is pro-America. I am America first. What is in America's best interest? And it really doesn't matter to American best interest whether or not Russia takes over and absorbs Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine.
Now that you have a more of a nationalist firebrand who we might find more ideologically attractive than Prigozhin, what about people like RFK Jr., who have recently become on the Russian dole, or old-timer folks like Jill Stein of the Green Party? All of these commitments that the Russians have cultivated very carefully over the last...
So really, Jill Stein and RFK Jr., are they on the Russian dole? Or are they skeptical of the unanimously intense just hatred of Russia that seems to dominate our establishment, our elites, our foreign policy crew? Right? I don't see how provoking Russia and fighting a proxy war with Russia is in America's best interests. And I don't think that makes me a Putin shill.
Video number 3 on the ongoing coup/revolution in Russia. Let's talk about Wagner. Now, according to Prigozhin, the leader of Wagner, they've got 25,000 troops, and they've been able to attract a few defecting units from the Russian general military. We don't know if that is true. One of the things to remember about Wagner is it gets its troops from 2 sources. Source number 1 are Russian veterans, particularly people from some of the higher ranks, special forces, Oman troops, Spetsnaz, that sort of thing. They tend to be relatively competent, and so Wagner generally has the best troops and the best logistical capacity within the Russian system. What they don't have is their own hardware. They rely upon the Ministry of Defense for their equipment, for their armor, and their air defense, and they have no air assets at all. No helicopters, no jets. So if you see reports of airstrikes on Wagner, especially if they start moving up to Moscow, you should take those reports very seriously, because if you were Putin, that's how you would cut them up. Let them get out into the exposed on a 10-hour drive to Moscow and just start...
So I can give you all the critiques I want of Peter Zeihan, but this is how Peter Zeihan works in my life. When I learn there's a new Peter Zeihan video, I watch it pretty quickly. I think I am more quick to watch a new Peter Zeihan video than a video of anyone else of which I'm aware. So that's how I roll.
Blowing them all on the road. As we know, if you take out the front echelon and the back echelon, the rest of them just kind of scramble in a death pile in the middle. That is a very realistic way of how this can all end, which, unless Prigozhin is completely stupid, wouldn't do it. But remember, this is a guy who is a convicted thief and former caterer. He is not a military super mastermind.
And I read Peter Zeihan's 3 books, and I thought they were excellent. I'm really glad I did. I'm glad I invested, 30 hours of time reading his books.
Okay. Anyway, barring a complete collapse of the Russian military structure and political society, which you can't rule out, this is Russia, this has happened before, Prigozhin and Wagner really have no chance here. Small number of troops, isolated in a specific part of the country, and while that might be hugely significant for the Ukraine war, they are just too far away from Moscow to make their voices heard in any meaningful, sorry, I phrased that wrong, not their voices heard, to make their desires reality. There's just too much space, too many Russians, and too much air power. That doesn't mean there aren't consequences here, even if this is a massively failed coup. Ukraine we've already talked about, but what about the rest of the world? Wagner, because it's one step removed from the Russian military, which is part of the problem, has been Putin's go-to tool for dealing with the international system for over a decade. And so almost all Russian military deployments around the world aren't actually regular Russian military. They're primarily Wagner. That's true in Syria, in Libya, in Sudan, in the Central African Republic, and on and on and on. And now the there's so many weird ways that this could have gone. This was definitely not one that was on my radar. But now that Wagner is persona non grata, every Russian military base around the world is going to get shut down by the Russians in the next few weeks. That, of course, assumes that...
Okay, is this right? Is this an accurate prediction? Every Russian outpost in the world is going to get shut down in the next few weeks?
Countries who are trying to seek favor with Putin don't go against Russian forces at Putin's... Oh my God, this is just delicious. Okay. Yeah, I've got to get myself some popcorn for this. Okay, folks, the bottom line here is that Wagner's military capacity is a subset of Russian military capacity, but the personnel are different. And so now that the personnel have changed sides, you should expect to see a complete disintegration of the entire Russian global position beyond the former Soviet Union. Within the former Soviet Union, as a rule, it is the Russian military who is in the pole position. But beyond that, wherever it happens to be, it's Prigozhin and Wagner that are the face of Russian strategic foreign policy. And now that that's on the other side of a rebellion, that is going to completely die. Now, for those of you who have been worried about the long duration of Russian power, this is great, because remember, Wagner is the best troops that Russia has. It's the sum total, it's really the only place that Russian vets go to after they leave the regular military. And they are scattered around the world. They are vulnerable. They are now without supplies or fuel or diplomatic cover. They are enemies of the state. Wow. It's going to be a wild week, folks. Oh, one more thing. Big question that we don't know the answer to. There are 2 sources of troops for Wagner, the military veterans and also convicts that they've pulled out of prison to use as cannon fodder. Now, convicts are good as cannon fodder for offensive operations, but they're not good for defensive operations. So, and they're probably not good for sending into, say, like a city like Moscow where there's regular Russian forces either. So basically, the convicts have become a non-issue in this. And so it really comes down to the rest of the troops. Wagner no longer has the ability to recruit. All they can do is try to flip Russian regular military units. That is their only source of troops. So,
well, is this like homophobic? Is he trying to draw an analogy here with gays that they can't reproduce, therefore the only way they can reproduce is by grooming? I mean, I gotta disavow if anyone reads something homophobic into Peter Zeihan's commentary here.
So Wagner absolutely has no staying power in this fight. The question is, what can they do in the very, very, very short term? They have access to the military stocks around Rostov, and that's it. So this is probably going to be a mad dash in Moscow, which would be suicidal, or a protracted defense in Rostov to draw upon the stocks where they can actually defend. Regardless of which those options are, this is fantastic.
Well, I don't think either of those happened. Instead, they reached a deal.
Fantastic for the Ukrainians, because if it's option 2, defense of Rostov, then all of that equipment is no longer available for Russian troops in Ukraine at all. They make the mad dash for Moscow, then we have a very public, very global, very humiliating military rebellion in the heart of Russia, in which the Kremlin and Putin are the direct targets. I would expect them to win and win handily, but Russia will not recover from that sort of image. And from a tactical military point of view, if Prigozhin and Wagner are making a mad dash for Russia, then forces, the best forces that Russia has outside of Wagner, are in Ukraine. They're going to have to leave Ukraine in order to catch up with Wagner in order to defend the motherland.
Yeah, that didn't happen. The Wagner group got apparently within 200 miles of Moscow and then turned around. So when I get interested in a topic such as trying to get my head around, how seriously I should take Peter Zeihan's analysis, I like to go to Google Scholar. So I go to Google Scholar, I put in Peter Zeihan. So let me do that right now. It's been a few months since I've done this, but what I notice is that there's no academic interest in the work of Peter Zeihan. Right? There's no academic analysis. So it quotes his 2022 book. That's the top result. Then an article he wrote in 2010. Then another book he wrote, The Accidental Superpower. Then the 2020 book he wrote, Disunited Nations, A Scramble for Power in an Ungoverned World. The Absent Superpower, Shale Revolution, A World Without America Analysis, Russia's Far East Turning Chinese for ABC News in 2014. Something he wrote for Stratfor in 2009, The Financial Crisis and the Six Pillars of Russian Strength. The United States, Europe, and Bretton Woods, that he wrote with George Friedman for Stratfor, Geopolitical Intelligence Report 2008. Something he wrote for Stratfor in 2006. Oh, here's a book review. Oh, man, but there's nothing I can cite. The End of the World, Peter Zeihan is wrong. Here's why. That's a book review from December 27, 2022. I missed that. Okay. Solar Social Science Network. Okay. This a determinist demographics coupled with geographic determinism that ignores ideology, culture, history as factors shaping international relations. As a consequence of the blind spots and a willingness to make grand, sweeping conclusions, Zeihan takes up several unfounded positions and reaches unrealistic conclusions. His work, though internally coherent, is crippled by its blind spots. All right, it's pretty awesome. We can download this paper. So this is the first academic analysis of which I'm aware to look into Peter Zeihan. But it doesn't look like a very academic analysis. Okay, what a disheartening title. What's the source? All right, book review. Download this paper, independent. Not sure this has been peer reviewed. Right, he says Peter Zeihan is wrong. He elaborates on a complex set of interlocking assumptions linked to empirical details leading to logically entailed conclusions with broad-ranging implications. Several of the assumptions Zeihan makes are wrong. What exactly is Zeihan wrong about? Zeihan predicts the U.S. will withdraw from the world into a form of neo-isolationism. He argues that globalization has not benefited the U.S. That's untrue. A better argument would be that the costs of global hegemony in dead Americans and trillions of dollars wasted for little or no benefit are simply too high for American voters. However, even the better argument is also untrue. Peter Zeihan miscalculates the costs and benefits to the USA of engagement. The U.S. will not retrench, withdraw, or enter into any other form of neo-isolationism because states are rational power maximizers, and the USA benefits with a sort of seigniorage from global hegemony. Literal seigniorage in the case of the fact currency, figurative seigniorage in the form of several extensive and mutually supporting alliance and trade networks, as well as soft power in the form of an attractive culture and ideology. Peter Zeihan overestimates the cost of the failed global war on terror. Okay. It was a costly failure. Zeihan doesn't recognize just how much punishment the proles can take and still support the home team. So we wasted about $7 trillion fighting the global war on terror. So Peter Zeihan seriously underestimates the capacity of non-elites to absorb casualties. Well, this analysis doesn't grapple with the financial cost. Right, we're looking at about $7 trillion, I believe. Okay, Peter Zeihan underestimates the benefits of globalization to the USA. Free trade makes business more efficient, resulting in greater riches for all. It makes war less likely. Countries heavily invest in trading each other, enjoy prosperity, and less likely to go to war against each other. That's nonsense. Germany and England were each other's #1 trading partners right before World War I. Didn't stop them from going to war with each other. Zeihan predicts the USA will retrench into isolationism because liberal internationalism failed. In reality, the US will not become isolationist because the benefits of hegemony are far greater than its costs. At first, Biden thought he should leave the hapless Ukrainians to their fate. The Ukrainians had other ideas. Within a month, the USA was forced to re-engage in international affairs. The US cannot withdraw into neo-isolationism, even if it wanted to, since rockets can cross oceans and the US has a large, wealthy populace that will not be ignored by other great powers. As Zeihan predicts the end of globalization, in reality, globalization will continue or even intensify. Trade will grow because people are greedy. Maritime patrols won't disappear, so piracy will stay suppressed. Zeihan believes the US will withdraw from the globalized world hegemony it built over the course of decades at the cost of trillions of dollars. He fails to appreciate the powers of the sunk cost fallacy. So we've already sunk these costs, why not reap the benefits? Peter Zeihan predicts the Chinese government will fall due to a demographic collapse and deglobalization. Too bad China isn't Russia. Even though Chinese productivity will diminish as its population ages, Chinese culture remains hardworking, optimistic, and civil. Xi Jinping has centralized all state power into his own hands. China is a mass surveillance state. The Chinese don't want yet another revolution and civil war. Even if they did, they wouldn't be able to wage one due to mass surveillance and control through digital mass media. China is a perfect tyranny. The US and China are on a clear collision course. However, China does trade and invest with many other countries than the US, many of which will be happy to undercut and profit from a USA embargo. China will not collapse, global trade will not collapse, and there will not be pirates and famines. Why is Zeihan wrong? Because many of his basic assumptions are wrong. He overestimates decoupling and insourcing. He buys into geographic and demographic determinism. He is overly determinist about demography and geography. These factors influence, do not determine global affairs. Britain and Japan both become industrial powers despite a poor resource base. They were forced into trade. Their defensible position enabled them to avoid war. Geography and demography do have a real influence on world affairs, but so do ideology and political choice. So just as astrologers say the stars incline but do not compel, geopolitical analysts would do well likewise, not geography and demographics incline but do not compel. Marketing. There may be other reasons for Peter Zeihan's errors. One might be marketing, peddling a pack of proverbs about pirates and privateers. Sure, it sounds exciting. Instead of figuring out how to prevent and win the next war, we could simply imagine ourselves in a fantasy world like Mad Max and Thunderdome at sea. Sounds much more exciting than putting a tourniquet on your friend's arm or covering his sucking chest wound in plastic where you hope he will still breathe despite coughing up blood. That's war. It is hell. Zeihan's desire to feed and profit from others' fantasies about war as a grand adventure is professionally disgusting. Plenty of ways to make money without cheerleading for the Grim Reaper. Another error, according to this review, convenient wishful thinking. Zeihan's errors are due to convenient wishful thinking. If you imagine China will inevitably collapse, then you need not learn Chinese, nor need you understand Mao Zedong, Deng Xiaoping, or Xi Jinping thought. You need not do a deep historical analysis of Chinese history or Chinese foreign relations. If they collapse, that's mighty convenient. The USA wins by default. Zeihan's analysis short circuits critical, insightful thinking about China, how the US and China could and should relate, and encourages foolish reactionary tendencies. The best and least palatable explanation why Peter Zeihan errs so badly is disinformation. He picks up the Russian myth that Russia lacks defensible borders and runs with it. In fact, Russia is ice to the north and east, deserts to the south, and has vast forests, even larger marshes, as well as many very wide north-south rivers to the west. Russia enjoys 6 to 8 months of severe winter every year, year after year. It is vast. Every invader of Russia learns that Russia is entirely defensible, the deceptive 4 weeks of European summer notwithstanding. So Zeihan buys into the myth that Russia is indefensible and thus must expand to naturally defensible borders. So this myth is very convenient for Moscow, since it justifies all kind of foul actions, helps make it likely to be fighting a war in Poland rather than in Chechnya, Dagestan, Yakutia, or any of the other non-Russian nations subjugated by Moscow. Russia is a multinational state with serious centripetal tendencies, meaning towards collapse. Having a ready-made excuse for foreign war all the time, anytime, is a great way to distract from domestic problems, to build national unity and keep the army on its toes. Peter Zeihan uncritically accepts the Russian myth and adds his own knife twist. Due to supposed demographic collapse, Russia has only one remaining chance around 2020 to expand its borders to defensible limits. This is a myth. Russia can and does expand its population anytime with immigrants from the Caucasus, Central Asia, and even China. However, if you believe the first myth and the second myth, then you have no choice but to make your move on Estonia or Ukraine around 2020. This is disinformation. Peter Zeihan peddles the convenient myth that the Chinese Communist Party and the People's Republic of China will collapse. This won't happen because the Chinese people and government are hardworking, sober, realistic, intelligent. They're not crazy, aggressive, drunk, incompetent kleptocrats. Peter Zeihan does not speak Chinese. He's not studied Marxism. His ideas about China are less accurate, less likely to be taken up by Chinese people. Not even Falun Gong exiles seem all that into Peter Zeihan. Chinese Communist Party can see what is happening in Ukraine and thus reassessing their chances at a successful invasion of Taiwan. Cross-strait relationships between China and Taiwan are improving, even though one country, two systems is now no longer possible for mainland integration. The Falkland Islands campaign shows how difficult amphibious operations are and how they can have unintended consequences. Zeihan could be encouraging China to overreact by placing it under economic and demographic pressure in hopes of provoking an ouster of the Chinese Communist Party. Zeihan provokes deep thinking about some of the factors which determine international relations and grand trends. His market-driven energy sector analyses are superb. His corporate clients could never tolerate any inaccurate forecasts. When he strays outside of energy and agriculture markets, leaving the field of economics and entering into state-to-state relations, the results are a fascinating mess, overly determined by geography and demography with inadequate consideration of history and ideology. Okay, this was a book review by Dr. Eric Engel, LLM. Don't know what LLM stands for. Let's get more analysis of Peter Zeihan.
Let it pass.
And I don't know anyone at the Defense Department who's happy about that. Because if the Russians see this as an existential conflict, and they know they can't hold a match to NATO, then nukes are their only option. So the primary reason why everyone in the West has gotten shoulder to shoulder on this is they know that if Ukraine falls and Poland's next, there will be a direct fight, the Russians will lose, and then there will be a general nuclear exchange. So there's plenty of really solid reasons to root for the Ukrainians on this one.
Jesus Christ.
Having planted already several flags, let's just say that up to a point, this is inescapably correct, that Ukraine was a frontier on a wider pattern of escalation. But whatever that pattern actually was needs to be discussed further. We'll get to it. Go.
Okay, this is from the Vlad Vexler channel. This video was released 5 months ago.
Now, when this whole thing broke out, what do you think the Russians expected Ukraine to just give up?
Absolutely. That's what happened in 2014 for the most part.
And what are the possible scenarios for Russia? I mean, if it seems like they're completely committed to this.
They are.
And if they don't win it?
The Russian position is that our demographic structure is in such diseased and aged and terminal decline that the Russian state will be turning the lights off sometimes between 2050 and 2070 anyway.
Anyway.
Yeah.
And stop. Hyperbolic statement.
They've had a series of big melon scoops out of their birth rate throughout the history, World War I, World War II, the collectivizations under Stalin, Brezhnev's mismanagement, Khrushchev's mismanagement, the post-Cold War collapse, and a lot of these stack on top of each other, and the biggest one stacked on top of the post-Cold War collapse. So there are more Russians in their 50s than their 40s and their 30s and their 20s and the teens, and then they lie about the data of the teenagers on down. Which means that there aren't enough Russians that have been born in the last 30 years to carry the ethnicity forward much farther.
And stop. Now again, this is hyperbole that probably reaches a point where we can ask, what does this mean exactly? Carry the ethnicity forward.
And so they're thinking if they can forward position their military and plug those gaps now with their last generation of young people, then they can kind of die on their own terms 50 years from now.
Have they really thought about this in that term? Like,
yeah, this one way or another, this is the end of Russia. The question is whether it dies in the long term on their terms or in the shorter term when they're completely unmoored. Because if they fail to secure those borders, then they've got a 2,000-mile open border with countries they consider to be hostile, and they have no way of moving troops around in a way that would allow them to defend it. They'd just be waiting for somebody to come over and knock them over.
And you believe that they're aware of this, that they can't survive past 2050, 2070, right, whatever it is?
So Joe's pushed a bit, and instead of answering Joe's question about what's in the heads of these Russian leaders, Russian leadership, Peter's restated what he said before, and now Joe's pressing it again. That's the underlying reality, but is that what the Russians are also thinking, right? And let's see.
I think that's what's been driving them, because 2022 was the last year where they had a sufficient number of people in their 20s to even attempt this. So from my point of view, not only did the war always have to happen, it always had to happen by now.
Jesus.
Okay, so we're going to stop and have a little break here. Now, let's be clear, first of all. Are we listening to somebody who gives the impression that they know a great deal about Russia? Yeah, by the standards of somebody at the bus, of an enormous amount. What about by the standards of a Russia expert? What a Russia expert is isn't a factual matter. Of course, this is an evaluative question, because what a Russian expert is inseparable from what a good Russia expert is. But no, I don't recognize that. And preliminarily, right, without pushing Peter too much into a corner, but a Russian expert probably answers these questions. You know, is that what they think? Joe says, and the answer should be, well, they don't think that, but that's why they don't think that, and that's what they really think, or what they think, and so on. And this is how Putin's thought has evolved, and this is where he is now, and this is where he was 4 years ago, this is where he was 12 years ago, and so on. Instead, right, Peter just returns with his geopolitical chessboard, and Joe's questions are not answered. So what is going wrong here? And again, this is not about giving a score out of 10 for Peter on this. This is about you coming to me and asking for my view, but it's also about us working through our sort of epistemic skills. Now let's look at something sociologically important. And that's that the majority of serious Russia experts would not be able to relate to what Peter is saying. And that's obviously a matter of alarm bells ringing, right? Your alarm bells should be ringing if that sociological fact is true, and it's true. Maybe it's not a fact, it's an evaluative judgment, but it's a kind of a sociological reality that most Russia experts begin with the thought that Putin got into this war out of considerations not about national security, but about regime security, right? And the way I render this for you, historically in our videos, is that we say, look, part of the reason for this war, very big part of the reasons for this war, is Putin feeling that it's a necessary defensive enterprise to avoid a situation whereby Russia, a few years from now, is wobbly, right? The regime is fragile, and at that point, Ukraine, on Russia's border, culturally a country of relative proximity to Russia, where Ukraine is independent and democratic, at that moment of fragility for the Putin regime, because that evokes in Putin images of Gaddafi and images of Saddam, because Ukraine could act as a platform that tilts this precarious situation in Russia against Putin's favor, and he wants to secure himself against that scenario, and he considers, hypothetically, Ukraine as a threat to his regime, as a threat to his life, right? And as a threat to Russian civilization that in his mind is tied to the will of a single individual, Putin. So sociologically this is interesting, right? But I'm also putting the epistemic foot down here too and saying that these matters of regime security, roughly construed as I've construed them, are driving, right, the war causally. But let's talk about the connected national security aspect here. Now, Peter's saying we've got a demographic crisis-mediated desire to plug a geographical hole for national security. Now, does the sociology improve here? Do these Russian experts wake up and say, no, oh, okay, this is something better? I don't think so. When I listen to this, it's not clear that I'm listening to somebody of comparable knowledge about Russia and the causes of Russian policy. And I'm not listening to a picture of causality that I recognize. Sure, there is a pattern of escalation there that goes far beyond Ukraine, and it's about challenging the West, challenging NATO, challenging Article 5, and there are hypothetical scenarios in which Russia has Ukraine, has Moldova, does a true build-up, let's say, on the border of the Baltic states, and takes things from there. But this is about shaking up the international order, exposing a weak response, a weakness of the West. It's going to respond with weakness because the Russian doctrine is that the West is now in irreversible decline. This decline, if it's real, which is to some extent real at the level of democracy, is nevertheless vastly exaggerated in the Kremlin. And then we're going to have a little reboot of the international order. Right? So it's an escalation that anticipates a somewhat passive response from the West. But this isn't about demographic crises, and this is not about plugging holes. And moreover, there are mystical, quasi-mystical reasons for the war to do with Putin's civilizational turn, circa 2010 to 2014 and onwards. This is unavailable, right, through Peter's goggles, and certainly alarm bells have to ring. But I'm going to carry on. So, go.
What caused all this to be so poorly managed?
Well, Russia has always been poorly managed and authoritarian, but under Putin it's taken a much darker turn because of the nature of the end of the Cold War. If you remember back to 1982, there was a coup in the Soviet Union, and Chernomyrdin and Andropov and Gorbachev were FSB, well, then KGB agents who basically overthrew the old system of Brezhnev and took over and tried, because they're the only ones who really had a full understanding of what was going on. They controlled the information. They were not able to save the system, and so it broke.
Stop. Now, this is not hyperbole, but this is a kind of distance from historical concreteness that's really worth bringing out. I'm going to give Zeihan a pass here on Chernomyrdin. Chernomyrdin was certainly in politics at the time, but he was young. He wasn't even a minister of the gas industry yet, I don't think. He was.
So Vlad doesn't speak as dramatically, as compellingly. He doesn't communicate as effectively as Peter Zeihan. But his analysis might be a little more informed.
He was about to get that position toward the middle of the 80s, and Chernomyrdin was later prime minister of Russia and I believe Russian ambassador to Ukraine. Peter gets a pass because he really means Chernenko, not Chernomyrdin, and it's a slip of the tongue, and we've got to be clear about that. But Chernenko and Gorbachev were KGB agents. Really? For real? Andropov was head of the KGB. And there was a coup. What kind of coup was there, Peter? Maybe Peter has a legitimate answer, but Brezhnev died. He wasn't overthrown. And there were then significant changes, of course, of various kinds of interesting stories there. Andropov and Gorbachev had a kind of unlikely relationship. Andropov met Gorby in the late 60s, and they had challenges and disagreements. But
So one thing I noticed very early on about Peter Zeihan videos is he doesn't seem overly hung up on accuracy or truth, right? He has these hot takes that are great fun to listen to, but frequently factually off base.
He had an eye on Gorbachev, or a positive kind of eye. Meanwhile, Gorbachev was exasperated by Andropov's incapacity to analyze the situation as it really was. But what Peter's coming out with here is something that an historian or a political analyst of an academic kind really wouldn't say, because this is a cartoonification that is really worth noting. Let's go on.
And Putin is the successor to that legacy because he was also in the KGB. And we're now in an environment that between the terminal demographic structure of the Soviet/Russian system and Putin's personal paranoia, so he's gone through and purged what was left of the KGB, FSB, of anyone who has personal ambitions to succeed him. We're left with an entire political elite of only about 130 people. And Putin has removed anyone who has leadership ambitions.
So there are academic analyses of China, which I think make more sense, such as the 2015 book Unrivaled, Why America Will Remain the World's Sole Superpower by Michael Beckley, and his follow-up Danger, The Coming Conflict with China by Hal Brands and Michael Beckley.
Oh, geez.
Now, they all see the world the same way. They all kind of agree with Putin on what's at stake here.
They all agree with what's at stake. That's unclear. I mean, how many people in Putin's Security Council would have started a full-scale invasion of Ukraine? Between 0 and less than a handful, perhaps? But where Peter is right is that Putin's actually marvelous at picking people. He's very good at picking people. But he only picks people who are profoundly corrupt and profoundly loyal, right? Which restricts the field. And to that extent, Peter is right. But then Peter goes on to say something that is, again, hyperbolic, that there are 130 people in this sort of elite. And that Sechin is the only one out of them who could ever do a revolution or a coup against Putin. But that if he did a coup against Putin, Peter says, then the rest of that elite would stop him or punish him afterwards, get rid of him afterwards. Now, that could be an okay sort of use of hyperbole, but of course, if you took that literally, that's just a silly statement that no serious Russian expert would make. And then he says later that Putin is in his mid-60s, which isn't true. But again, this is the sort of thing I would give him a pass for.
So what I notice when people want punditry on foreign affairs, domestic affairs, punditry on anything, they want stuff that's going to make them feel good. They don't put a premium on good epistemics. Come on, guys, check your epistemics. Epistemics opposed to how do you know what is true and what is false, and charm and emotional power and communication abilities shouldn't overpower the importance of good epistemics. All right, let me have a look at another analysis here of Peter Zeihan.
They will be interested in.
It is certain that your viewers will be interested in military aircraft, sir.
Anyway, let's see what we have. Okay, research, your viewer searches, and the first term is Peter Zeihan. Who's Peter Zeihan?
He is an American geopolitics speaker, sir.
Ah, okay. Okay, let's have a look. What's this gentleman doing? Wow, that's a lot of interest. It's actually beating the F-22, it's beating the F-35. I need to understand more. What will the world look like in 5 years? The end of the old world order, geopolitics, innovation, and deglobalization. Okay, let's see. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, come on. Really? Yeah, that's a good idea. This cannot be true. Come on. China's decline, the Russian grab.
He has been like this for a week.
Oh, you're there. I watch all the videos on Peter Zeihan channel. I also read his last book about the end of the world that is just beginning. I read The Accidental Superpower, and I watched from beginning to the end at least 15 long presentations. So I'm probably not the best expert on PZ's thoughts, but I think I got the main points. I think I'm understanding why he is so popular, or at least he's so popular in the United States. He's telling a large part of the American public what they want to hear. The core of his message is that the end of globalization is now, and this is going to cause a deep global crisis. crisis that is going to last a few years. But the United States, after this, are going to come out on top because of their demographic structure and their economy that is not so intertwined with the rest of the world economy. Russia and China, on the other hand, are going to crash and burn because of their demographic profile and other economic and geopolitical reasons, leaving the United States as the only superpower for decades in the future.
So I told a friend that who watches as many Peter Zeihan videos as I do, and I told him, well, Zeihan does present a cartoon version of reality. And my friend said, well, I love cartoons.
Sure. If I were an American from the United States, I would love to hear this. This is a very comforting and reassuring vision. No use to say I don't agree, because otherwise I wouldn't be here making this video. But I don't want to be misunderstood. Vlad is extremely accurate and extremely informed. His data are factually correct. His interpretation of specific issues is often spot on. He is an excellent professional with years and years of experience, and I'm definitely not questioning that. It is the different cultural background that brings me to a radically different interpretation of...
Okay, let's go to the chat. He's implying Ukraine was invaded because it acts as a kind of liberal democratic West Berlin. Wouldn't Putin have to distinguish every other liberal democracy to maintain regime security in that case? Good point. Epistemic humility is what we are after. Charm and bombastic takes unconcerned with actual truth might as well be pro-wrestling promos. Peter Zeihan is one of my top 5 disagreements with Luke, but I enjoy Luke's semi-serious Sunday shows. This guy has all the secret insights, says Half Galician, except on diet and exercise.
Of the history of the world after World War II, which in turn is shedding a different light on the events of today. But I am not going into these details. This is not a geopolitics channel. Geopolitics is not my main area of expertise. However, Pete has made some points about some of the world militaries, and I have something to say about that. On several occasions, even recently, PZ said that the Chinese Navy is not a blue water navy. And the reason for this is that several Chinese ships have a very limited range, so they are inherently defensive ships. Well, this was maybe true 20 years ago, but today I really don't understand where this is coming from. The range of modern Chinese ships is the same as other ships of the same category in service with other navies in other countries. For example, the estimated range of the Type 55 is 5,000 miles. The range of an Allied Burke destroyer is 4,400 miles. The range of a Chinese Type 52 destroyer is 4,500 miles, according to the most reliable estimates. The two classes, Type 55 and Type 52, number about 45 units, with 4 units being built right now as we speak, which is August 2022. So you can't classify them as a small core modern ship in an otherwise defensive navy. They are basically the Chinese Navy mainstream. The Chinese modern frigates at Type 54 have a shorter range, but it is...
Yeah, Half Galician says this is this is the more prestigious weekly magazine Luke Ford stream. Like Sunday morning on CBS News with Charles Carroll.
Is pretty much aligned with Western ships of the same displacement. But beyond the range of the ships, even more important for sustained and long-range operations is the capability of refueling at sea. The United States has the...
Yeah, 40 has a utility line like the Chevrolet. That's what he produces on a daily basis. You have to be prepared for a lot of schlock. But then he releases his Cadillac Prestige streams on Sunday mornings.
Largest fleet in the world, but probably the Chinese fleet is number 2. The Chinese fleet includes 2 large 45,000 tons of displacement supply ships, which are pretty much equivalent to the American supply class, plus there are 14 smaller vessels. And it seems that Chinese are going to build 2 more large ships in the near future. So I would say that China's supply capacity is pretty much proportioned to the current mission of the...
God forbid, guys, are you suggesting that the more prep I put into a show, the better the show will be, rather than just winging it, coming home at 10 to 6 on a weekday and then like firing up the start live streaming at 6:05 p.m. with a handful of notes or just maybe one idea that I got while listening to my favorite pop song?
Chinese Navy, including long-range power projection. There are obviously other elements that make the Chinese lag behind the US Navy in terms of global power projection, but I think that they're doing pretty well when it comes to range. The Japanese Navy is the second in the world, and it is a full blue water navy. And this is another common point that is made by Pizza. Well,
yeah, you'll notice if I don't stream for a week, I come back with a lot of energy and a lot of compressed content. When I stream every day, I stretch out the content that I have. But Ford does some of his best material after the spiritual tranquility and spiritual reflection of the day of rest, the Shabbos.
Japanese Navy is indeed modern and very capable, but surely it is behind the Chinese Navy in numerical terms, and it definitely doesn't have a full blue water projection capability like the Americans have. It is definitely a numerically strong Navy. It has a lot of submarines, which is interesting, and potentially a lot is going to change when the F-35Bs are going to operate routinely from the two Izumos. These are going to become full-fledged light carriers, and we have already discussed on the channel the importance of this new type of carrier ship. I suggest you to watch the video, links above and below. In terms of blue water projection, though, the Japanese ship's range is pretty much average, aligned with the rest of the world, so there's nothing special to see here. The replenishment fleet, though, is quite small. There are just 5 vessels, none of them larger than 25,000 tons. Surely the Japanese at the top of their readiness can sustain at sea 1 or 2 or even 3 battle groups, but so can UK, so can France. So yes,
So I've been waking up at 3 a.m. most every day for several weeks now. Though one day last week, I didn't wake up until 5:10, and that was like fantastic. I had so much sleep. I probably got close to 7 hours of sleep that night. Normally, I get about 5. I mean, I would stay in bed past 3 a.m. if I could, but I wake up at 3 a.m. just like eager to write. You know, I was working on my blog at 3 a.m. and I only allow myself a cup of coffee about once a week. So I had my weekly cup of coffee this morning, and I am so fired up. I am so charged up. I am so excited to be here.
the Japanese Navy is an important force, but definitely doesn't have a global reach. China won't reach the technology level of the United States before 2080, and only if the United States stand still. This is another of the statements that I've heard from Pete. Okay, just staying on what is relevant in the military world. China, in this case, has...
So you may think cup of coffee, no big deal, but guys, when I get my nootropic stack correct, oh, I forgot, damn, I forgot to take my L-theanine with my cup of coffee, like 4 or 5 hours ago. That's supposed to make the coffee high last twice as long. But when I do drink coffee, remember, I'm stacking it on top of my modafinil. But I'm supposed to stack it on top of my modafinil with my L-theanine. Doggone it.
Has the advantage of being the second mover. Just knowing what is possible and what has already been done is a great advantage. Usually the second one to develop autonomously a technology.
Okay. Blessings to Elliott Blatt.
Oh, blessings, bro. I'm in the car. It's a car call. Sorry, dude.
Blessings.
Hold on. I'm not hearing you through the speakers. This is actually a limitation.
You're not hearing me.
No, it's not. It's the car. It's my car issue.
I feel like it's my fault. I feel like I've let you down in some way. I'm to blame.
Well, you have, but not
I
this
screwed
regard.
up again. I have been such a bad friend. You've been nothing but goodness and kindness and blessings to me, and yet every time you call in, I let you down. I'm coming to you through the wrong aperture.
Yeah, that's right. You're going into the outdoor, bro.
Doggone it.
So anyway, Luke, I had a little surprising event this past week.
Yeah.
Which I think it's an amusing story. Like, you know, Deep Left Jokkul?
Yes.
All right. So I'm like sitting, it's bright and early. I'm like just, sipping coffee, looking at the phone, and I get an email that comes in, and it's from Deep Left Jokkul. And he's like, hey, I'm in San Francisco. You want to meet up? And I'm like, what? This is bizarre. And I'm trying to put the pieces together, like how this could have happened, And, I used to go into his streams and I used to kind of troll him a bit, And he was saying that, all of the sort of degradation that we're seeing in San Francisco and so forth, in other cities, is exaggerated by the media, and we shouldn't believe this. It's a psyop, this kind of crap. So I'm like, bro, you should come to California and I'll show you, right?
Yeah.
And he sort of took that as actually a literal invitation. I was sort of being rhetorical, and he sort of took it literally. This is what I was able to put together. Why he would do this. But anyway, me, I'm up for a game or two, so like, I'm like, let's play ball, yo. So, but he says, I'm staying with 3 friends and they're coming too. So 4 people in total, right? I'm going to pick up and put in my car and give them like the, the little tour, right? And I'm like, it's going to be tight. You sure you want to do this, etc.? And they're like, yes, let's do it, etc. So I said, okay, I'll pick you up at this corner at 3 p.m., right? And it's this corner in front of this restaurant at 3 p.m. So it was just like these ultra precise instructions that, because I knew these things always tend to blow up, like people just can't execute the most simple tasks, even if you spell them out for them, like in excruciating detail.
Unless they're galaxy brains like Deep Left Jokkul.
Yes, I figured if anybody doesn't need this, it would be the galaxy brain that is deep left Jokkul. So I say, meet me here at 3 o'clock. Now, Luke, if you were going to pick me up at a certain corner at 3 o'clock, what time would you arrive at that corner?
2:45.
Exactly, Luke. You don't say, oh, I'll show up at 3 and maybe get there by 3:15. You say, I'll show up at 2:45 just so there's no chance of being late, right? I'm going to respect, my time such that I'm going to make sure, even if I have to wait on that corner with my phone in one hand and my pecker in the other.
And my cock in the other hand, I'll be there on time because I don't want to steal other people's time. I will loathe myself if I steal other people's time, and I don't like hating myself.
Exactly. And so I'm saying, what are the chances? Now, bear in mind, it's a 2-part contract. So I said to be here at 3 o'clock. I'm going through traffic. I'm stressing whether or not I'm going to arrive at 3 o'clock as promised. My word is my bond, bro.
Yeah.
And so I'm holding up my end of the bargain. Sure enough, I arrive at that corner at 2:58, 2 minutes early, and so I'm thinking, okay, where's Deep Left Jokkul? Right? And he's not there. And I'm looking around. So I drive around the block, and now it's like 3:02. And where's Deep Left Jokkul? Not there. And so, just the veins are just bulging out of my head at this point. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I am so ripped at this. But I'm saying, I'm not going to, I'm going to keep together. I'm not going to ruin this whole little adventure just because someone's 2 minutes late. So finally, an email comes in. Hey, man, we're on our way. We'll be there within 15 minutes. And I'm like, this is, and then I immediately tell you, I say, where are you now? I'll pick you up right now. Apparently that email wasn't received. So bottom line, they end up getting there at 3:10, 10 minutes late.
Okay.
It's not the end of the world, but it's not an auspicious beginning. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't bode well for what's to come. It's just this fact alone. So sure enough, Deep Left Jokkul piles into the passenger seat, and his 3 droogs get in the back seat, one after the other. Now, these are all guys that I would say are about 25 years old, high IQ, reasonably fit, but very shy. They're all shy and quiet, right? There's a certain quiet, timid, fearful energy about them, Maybe they're being polite, but, I remember if there were like 5 people in a car when I was growing up, it would be raucous.
Yeah.
Right? There would be jokes upon jokes upon jokes. People would be laughing, and it would be sort of this, juvenile but fun experience, right? Not these guys, bro. It was like a funeral dirge. Nobody was saying anything. And so I'm driving around, just a little side observation. I don't know if this is true across the board with this whole generation, but they were just weird in that way. So anyway.
Wait, is it because you're Jewish? Like, Deep Left Jokkul doesn't care for the Jews.
Oh, he doesn't?
No.
He's not Jewish himself?
I don't believe so.
Is that true?
Were you wearing a yarmulke? Were you wearing a yarmulke when you picked him up?
No. But
Okay.
he has a lot of Jewish mannerisms.
Do you think they were afraid you were going to sexually assault them simply because you live in San Francisco?
No, they weren't afraid of that. No, they weren't afraid of that.
Did you play the bone? Anyway, did you play the bone in the car?
No, what I did play, I did. I thought about that, but I played that 88 Lines About 44 Women song, like as a little icebreaker to see if I
played some Air Supply.
Yeah, should have. But that went over like a dead balloon, like one of the funniest songs of the 20th century. They didn't get it. You know, they weren't impressed. So anyway, I'm saying, so immediately I know I'm in for a long afternoon at this point, right? Because I basically struck out. And so we decided that we're going to drive across the bridge and go up to Mount Tam. Do you know Mount Tam? Mount Tamalpais, Marin County.
Not intimately.
Okay, it's a little teeny mountain. It's like a big hill, but it's technically a mountain. So there's a road, you drive up the top, you get this sprawling vista of the city, and it's having the ocean. It's really nice, you know.
It's really romantic.
It's romantic, bro. It's very romantic.
A great play for a circle jerk.
Yeah, exactly. That was part of my plan. So we and the dudes, we pack into the car, we're in the car, we drive up. And so the conversation, I swear to God, Luke, just as we're getting on the they asked me who I listen to, you know, what I listen to online, you know, what I watch. And I swear to God, Luke, as soon as we get on the bridge, one of the dudes from the back seat says, "Hey, do you know Luke Ford?" You know, and I was like, fortunately, because of the traffic situation on the bridge, I couldn't I didn't think of a funny joke. You know, I wanted to pursue that line of inquiry, but because of the traffic, I just wasn't on my game. And I said something like, "What do you know of Luke Ford?" And then the traffic got up, and then the subject changed, and then it never went anywhere. But it was an amusing thing nonetheless. So I didn't know Deep Left Jokkul was an anti-Semite. How did you learn this?
Well, he just makes it very clear he doesn't like the Jews, and he won't talk to anyone who talks to a Jew. So,
is that true?
That's what he says. I mean, who knows?
No, but I've never seen that. I mean, I've seen a fair bit of his content, but I didn't know that was the answer.
Yeah, he won't go on any channel that platforms Jews.
No, I can't be. I think you're misunderstanding. Well, I'll tell you about it. Here's what he doesn't like to be upstaged. That's one thing I noticed. He got very he's the type of guy, he sort of interacts with the environment. He makes jokes. Some of them are funny, some of them aren't. But if you make a joke and it's funny, or even dare I say funnier than his joke, you know, he feels hurt by that.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought that was amusing. He
doesn't really have friends. He has more fans.
Yes, and then yeah, exactly. So on the way down from the mountain, we had this conversation. I'm saying, so what about the C word, bro? You know, I'm using a lot of bro talk, you know, and like the C word. He says, "What's the C word?" And I said, "Career," right?
Yeah.
What's your career plans? You know, and then he says he wanted to be a cult leader, you know, and I thought he was being funny and ironic, but I think he sort of semi-believed it. You know, I think he does kind of fancy himself a leader of men of sorts.
Very much.
So
I think he's completely serious about that. He does want his own cult.
Yeah,
that's what he's building.
So when some people, you know, immediately I checked out. I'm like, you know, I can't. Something like that. so absurd. I mean, it's nothing to engage with. And now I think I'm dealing with a crazy person at this point. You know, you sort of move from being sort of somewhat eccentric to being a crazy person. So anyway, we go through this, and then he's sort of really obsessed about like where in the country he ought to be and why he should be there, and what are the different attributes of one place versus another, and what's the most optimal place. Oh, okay, and that's another thing. So all these dudes were like very much internet creatures, right?
Yeah.
They all had special diets, like very special, peculiar diets they learned about on the online. So one guy was like, he ate only beef, eggs, dairy, fruit, and honey. Those are the only things he would allow himself to eat, right? A very peculiar paleo diet, right? And then I think Jokkul is kind of like a keto guy. And then this Indian guy. So we stopped at this little restaurant on the way down the mountain. And this Indian guy was part of their cult group, their posse. He ordered dessert for dinner.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and this traumatized me. This triggered me. And so I don't know what the particulars of his diet were, but that struck me as an odd move. So anyway, the conversation it didn't really happen. It wasn't like it wasn't fun. It wasn't like a rollicking good time. It was a very strange, stilted, stiff, just unsatisfying experience.
How long did you guys spend together?
I would say about 4 hours.
Wow. And it didn't loosen up.
Evening dinner. It didn't loosen up that much, no. Maybe a little bit, but not much. I tried to. I was doing my damnedest to like loosen the whole situation up, and I just don't think it could. I don't think I was appreciated. Okay, so now that's part. So let's end that chapter. And so during the course of this, I took a bunch of photos of them and their group, and just being a good host and so forth. And so I checked my email, and I thought maybe I'll just get like a little email from Deep Left Jokkul saying, "Hey, thanks for taking 4 hours out of your life to, be a tour guide for me and my friends." Just a little note, a little thank you note. Look, when you go to an orgy, you kind of want a thank you note afterwards.
Yeah, with every single sex partner, I expect a thank you note.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's 10 in one night, I expect a thank you note.
Yeah,
each one.
Yeah.
And
a little calligraphy, maybe
something genuine, just like one heartfelt sentiment is enough for me.
Yeah.
I'm not needy.
I like a little calligraphy, to tell you the truth. I think you should take the extra time to get one of those pens and an inkwell and make, just draw my name in a nice cursive style, to show what the experience meant for you. I don't know. I'm old school, though. You know me, Luke. I'm trad. I'm a paleocon, Luke. I like the old things, the old style, the old way of doing things. I'm parking
the old
here.
ways of having orgies, yeah.
I got this. So anyway,
and so did you get that? Did you get
I
like
did not get that, Luke.
No,
I didn't get an email. I didn't get the email. Nothing. Zero. I mean, don't you remember you told me you love me, baby? I mean, nothing, bro.
Wow.
I'm
After
doing
all the things that you guys did together. I mean, you went up a mountain, you drove around.
Yeah. So, now, to me, I don't know. I can't even process that. It's like, how do you compute this? All right, I'm parking. Hold on a second.
That's okay. So we're talking about Ken Brown, aka Deep Left Jokkul, who has his flaws, but he's not a toxic person. He's not a nasty person. He's not someone who engages in nasty feuds. He shares his ideas online. He shares his life online, and out of anyone you can watch on the distant right, I say he's pretty harmless.
But I don't think there's anything right wing about him. You know, his political takes were very normie, very like Democrat v Republican kind of crap. You know, I didn't. At least didn't. I didn't. Okay, I made a way. You know, obviously I knew our politics differed, but I didn't really want this whole experience to be about politics. I wanted this to be like, you know, something social, something relaxing. You know. But when he did talk about politics, it was simply about. It was just very kind of normie. Oh, those are all a bunch of Republicans. I hate them. Yuck, yuck. You know, kind of stuff. Hello?
Yeah, and so do you think he's neurotypical?
No. I think he's got narcissistic personality disorder, to say the truth. Luke.
Yeah.
But I'm not a psychologist, Luke. What do I know?
I mean, most of us who spend so much time online, there's usually something broken and off.
Yeah.
And what about his friends? Did they seem neurotypical?
They did. They seemed but very shy and introspective, every single one of them.
So they did most of their socializing online.
I think so. And they were all software people. They were all, you know, programmers of one sort or another. Like one of them had these, you know, they were all sporting these various doodads that they got on Amazon. These various customizable, idiosyncratic possessions. Like one of them had these shoes that were sort of like gloves, like all the toes were individualized. You know, you ever seen those shoes?
Probably, but I don't really think much about shoes. Though I did see an amazing pair of shoes yesterday, bro. I mean, amazing shoes, an amazing dress, amazing. Wow. It's the first time I thought about shoes in donkey's ages.
Wow. Hold on a sec.
Wow. But, I mean, I'm still all a quiver. I mean,
Okay.
It just made me want to be a better Orthodox Jew.
Yeah. All right, I just climbed 3 flights of stairs. So
Did they wear shorts? Did they wear suit and tie?
No. They wore sort of athletic wear, tight fitting. They were generally fit.
Okay.
So which was a nice surprise, right? They weren't these land whales that, you know, we've become accustomed to.
Were they vaccinated? Did you make them show proof of vaccination before you let them in your car?
No. I don't think that topic even came up, which I'm glad it didn't. Hold on. I'm still breathing.
Yeah.
3 flights. All right. Well, anyway, that's the Deep Left Jokkul story. I'm sure there'll be different elements that will come back and I'll refresh you of. But I actually have to get ready for something.
Okay, bro. Blessings.
All right. Blessings. All right,
okay.
Peace.
Take care,
Bye.
bro. Okay.
Bye.
Thanks, Elliott Blatt. So yeah, I wonder what's Deep Left Jokkul's audience like? Who like likes his stuff? I mean, I like his stuff in that it's easy to critique. It's like it's someone trying to talk about things that are almost invariably like way beyond him, but you know, someone trying to hit way out of his league. It's like an intellectual climber, right? Someone who's, you know, trying to take on deep, serious topics, but doesn't really know much about what he's talking about. Like the guy's what, mid-20s, early 20s. Like who would be turning to him for wisdom about life? So I'm curious who his audience is. Like who receives a blessing. Now I think he's sometimes very funny. He's sometimes very good at mimicking people, and he's occasionally got some really smart things to say. He does seem to lack like normal social connection bonds to family, friends, and a particular community where he participates with others. I get the feel that he's much more interested in having fans and followers rather than having friends. There's something broken. He's not getting like the normal human need to connect, to make a family, to build something concrete within a concrete community. That doesn't seem to be happening for him, and he's compensating for the lack of love in his life by trying to maximize the amount of attention he can get by trying to hit attention-seeking topics that will present him as some really deep thinker, guru, cult leader, which to my mind don't usually show him off to advantage. He would be better off having more guests, more interactions, and focusing on the things he does well. He seems to lack life experience and seems to, human connection is frequently a foreign language to me, so I kind of recognize in Deep Left Jokkul that human connection is a completely foreign language for him too.
Does it quicker. It's true that in the last few decades, reverse engineering has grown more and more difficult, but it is still a viable practice that gives an advantage. This is enough to say that under current conditions, there will be soon a time when China will catch up with the United States on everything relevant. But PZ believes that the process of China crashing and burning has already started. We'll see. The Chinese Communist Party has established the year 2040 as the milestone for reaching a world-class military capability. As a keen observer of the Chinese military, well, I think that they are well on their way and they are progressing to that objective. There are obviously still gaps, and today I want to speak about two gaps that are particularly relevant. One of the gaps is about aircraft engine, high-performance engine for military aircraft. This is an example of a gap that has been closed very quickly by either acquiring technologies from abroad, by reverse engineering, or just indigenous development. The engines produced in China today are absolutely viable engines. There is a new generation in development in the West, but as for today, the Chinese have practically caught up. The most relevant gap, though, is in the semiconductor industry. This is extremely important because nowadays everything contains chips, everything contains semiconductors. China is already well versed in the low end of the market, but is also working feverishly to close the gaps and acquire control of all the other steps of the supply chain that are not currently available internally. This is a market with incredibly high barriers to entry because the semiconductor supply chain is incredibly sophisticated and complicated. In the world market, in each step of the supply chain,
Hedge fund billionaire Ray Dalio has said that China could be the world's next great superpower. On the show, Peter Zeihan has said to me that China is probably on the brink of catastrophe. Where do you see China's economy in the near future?
If China is to become that great economic power that everyone for a generation now has been saying is kind of inevitable, it has got so many barriers and so many hurdles it's got to get over between now and then that, frankly, it kind of is looking increasingly unlikely. The big ones are unquestionably the demographic cliff that China is facing. So its population is aging rapidly. The percentage of retirees is increasing aggressively. Hence, the balance between people in the workforce and the people who are retired and relying on people in the a smaller number of people in the workforce to generate economic growth. That imbalance is going to get bigger and bigger. And then on top of that, the absolute size of China's population is going to start shrinking aggressively. It's already shrinking, and it's just going to become more and more aggressive in its decline throughout the rest of the century. So that's the first big issue. The second issue is, China has already accumulated huge amounts of debt to drive its economic model over the past 20 years, and it's trying to work through that at the moment. And so, that as well is kind of presenting a headwind to its economic fortunes. On top of that, you've kind of got the economic challenges it's facing because the United States is no longer willing to sort of perpetuate the economic relationship, which has kind of been foundational to China's economic rise over the past 30 years. So all of that stands in the way of China, sort of the inevitability of China, something that I think was broadly anticipated. China would inevitably become a larger economy than that of the United States. It would inevitably become a great power in its own right. And because of those barriers, those things are not necessarily going to occur. I think realistically, China's strength has always been premised on its ability to be able to grow quickly and for its economic growth rate to remain at a fairly aggressive level relative to other economies. Now, we're at the point now where that no longer looks to be the case. It seems feasible that in the near future, China will be growing over the long term at 2%, 3%, maybe even longer. And that then raises maybe even lower, pardon me. So that then raises the question, a China that is growing at economic at rates which are comparable, maybe marginally faster, maybe marginally slower than major developed economies, does that allow it to translate into a greater power status? And I think that is the real challenge. I mean, if it is only growing at 2% or 3%, does that allow it to challenge the United States for great power status? Does that allow it to achieve that inevitability that we assumed that it was kind of baked into the cake? And I think increasingly it's looking as though that is not going to be the case.
If it's not the case, what comes next? Would we see a descent for China, or would it be a maintenance sort of period?
I think we're entering into a period of time, not just for China, but for many countries around the world, where it's difficult to say exactly what comes next because we've never really been in this position where populations are sort of starting to shrink fairly aggressively. I mean, our entire model of economic growth for however long it's been has been premised on the idea of growth, and that the part and parcel of that is the populations kind of get bigger year on year, even if it's only by marginal amounts, and all of a sudden, China's population is going to decline aggressively. So what does that mean for the political system? What does it mean for its aspirations? What does it mean for the way it engages with its neighbours? And all of that is an open question at the moment. But in terms of the sort of signals that come out of China at the moment, it is certainly aware of its vulnerabilities. It talks a lot about the need to ensure security of supply. It talks about the need to stimulate domestic demand and more equitably distribute wealth domestically, because it realizes that its economic model up until this point is not sustainable. There is this real understanding in the system that things have to change. But even though there is that understanding, and there's a whole lot of talk about how things have to change, it's difficult to say how that will necessarily connect and interact with the reality of, say,
Okay, Matthew Cockerell, aka the Twitter account and channel History Speaks, went on Richard Spencer's show. So he's appeared on Richard Spencer's show at least once or twice before. He's had quite an interest in Richard Spencer for several years. How do you think this is going to work out for young Matt, who's doing a PhD in history at the London School of Economics? So this appearance occurred June 22nd, 2023.
I will just get us started off. I guess I'll call you Matthew, or History Speaks is what you would like. You are a PhD student at the London School of Economics, and but you're American, as we can all tell by your accent. We got in touch, although I would say vaguely in touch, maybe a year ago or months ago. I can't quite remember, and we've had some brief casual conversations or just sharing of things. I think we've been on a space together a few times or what have you. And you actually invited me to moderate a debate that I saw you yammering away about for months with Mike Enoch. And as you can attest, I was a bit surprised by the whole thing. And my first instinct was like, well, I'm not sure I want to touch that thing with a 10-foot pole. But then I thought about it. I was like, well, I'll do it. I will actually be fair. I'll hear out Mike and his stuff. I'm not afraid of these ideas. And maybe I would be the best one for it in a way. And then, of course, Mike refuses. So it was very odd. But what do you tell? Before we get, I want to talk about historiography of the Holocaust and Holocaust revisionism. But before we talk about that, just give us your sense of, dealing with Mike, the debate itself, and all of the ins and outs of that.
Okay, so I want to say, because it's been like some mud slinging the last forever, I want to start with a few positive things about, and I don't take anything back I said. He dealt with me dishonestly, and people can read about that. I don't find that interesting. I'm going to say some things about Mike's personality, which I was impressed by. So intellectuals, and I will, with a bit of cringe, put myself in this category. I think intellectuals sometimes have a tendency to look at people like Mike or Nick Fuentes and say, these people are saying dumb shit. They don't know what they're doing. I could just embarrass them in 5 minutes. Actually, like the skill set like a Shock has is something that a lot of intellectuals don't have. And I think Mike exhibited that in the debate. And I was impressed, and I felt in terms of his just charisma, I felt like tired at the end. Like, wow, he really wore me out. In terms of the actual intellectual content we can get into more, I think he didn't have anything compelling. I mean, he was reduced in terms of the big gas chamber at Auschwitz, Birkenau. He was reduced to arguing that it may have been intended at one point as an explanation for why hydrogen cyanide detectors were installed, why it was called a gas cellar in multiple documents, why there was a preheating system. He was reduced to saying, oh, maybe the Germans intended it for gassing corpses. So gas chamber for gassing corpses, which I agreed out. So I just think,
seems odd.
I think that he was definitely the hardest of the verbal debates I did. The other two were kind of cupcakes. He was by far the most charismatic and strong, but I just think he had the argument and I had the facts.
Well,
so
I will praise him maybe a little bit more than you have. So I think that Enoch made a compelling ethical critique, but he didn't make a very compelling historical argument. So what I mean by that is that for, I think, probably like the second half of his opening statement, and he would reiterate these themes again and again, he was saying things like, we talk about the Holocaust all day long, and we skate over the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And in fact, there's an upcoming Christopher Nolan film that is going to lionize Oppenheimer and the group that created the atomic bomb. And we don't even mention Dresden. I bet most high school graduates in America don't know what that is or was. And the winners write history, and we tend to let ourselves off the hook for these things that are, at the very least, things that you should contemplate morally. Maybe they're morally dubious, maybe they're justified, but still horrifying. I mean, these are things we need to talk about, and yet we talk about the Holocaust all day long as a pure good and evil situation, and the incredible suffering, etc. I think that is actually a very solid point, and I agree with the basic tenor of that. But it's not an historical argument, and so when you say those things, you kind of lessen the power of that ethical critique by making it just kind of whataboutism. It's like, did this man murder his wife? It's like, well, Stalin murdered millions. It's like, well, okay, did this man murder his wife? We're trying to figure that out. It becomes a whataboutism and thus just totally irrelevant. And that was my impression. So I think he's not the first one to make this case, and he's not the best one, but he did make it. And it is something worth talking about, but it's just not a historical argument about the Holocaust. So there is my praise for Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And he had to resort to conspiracy theories with no evidence. So, for example, there in the case of Belzec, whether a mass grave has been exhumed in a camp or so on, it varies. In the case of Belzec, which was the third deadliest death camp, I believe. In the case of Belzec, 33 colossal mass graves have been uncovered by archaeologists in the late 1990s. They drilled down and found these mass graves. And Mike, he had two tactics on the Kola mass graves. He was finding late 1990s. First, he said only 15,000 corpses were in them, which was true but really dishonest because there were 15,000 unburned corpses in there. The ash is what's important, and the ash corresponded to hundreds of thousands of victims. And so I thought just focusing on, and again, I want to try to be less in the mud than we have been on this. I thought trying to make the point about the corpses without avoiding the ash was dishonest, but I was able to call him on that. And then when I made the point that the ash corresponds to hundreds of thousands of corpses, he just said, "Yeah, I don't believe that," and they were lying or something, So
yeah. Well, let's back up here and let's kind of get out of the nitty gritty. First off, I don't have a whole lot to say about the nitty gritty. I mean, I'm not a historian of the Second World War or anything, but I also think it'd be more useful to listeners to understand kind of like the trajectory of all this stuff, and the trajectory of the historiography of the Holocaust, but also the trajectory of the historiography of revisionism and the kind of history of that, because it certainly didn't begin with alt-right online podcast or something. It goes back further. So. And then I think we could also talk a little bit about the kind of like myth of the Holocaust. Again, not in the sense that it didn't happen, but the kind of way that it's used or misused, et cetera. But I want to start with the historiography of it. So why don't you tell us, give us the lay of the land in terms of the public awareness of the Holocaust and and historians beginning to examine it, kind of maybe starting after the war. I think we'll put the event itself aside just for at least the moment, but I want to talk about kind of the reception or reaction to the event. So what was the perception of these things as the war was coming to a close and then forward?
So yeah, it's a really good question, a very interesting question. So there's been a huge change, massive change in public perception of the Holocaust. Just taking America as one country, Peter Novak has a book called Holocaust in American Life. And the fascinating element of this is that right after the war, the position of the general public was much more indifferent. There was a sense of Nazi barbarism, Nazi thugs, et cetera, that wasn't specifically confined to Jews in a way maybe it is today. And among the Jewish community, there was a sense that something shameful has happened. Rather sad, really. They weren't survivors weren't lionized in the way they are now. Even Novak mentions this in his book. Early efforts to create monuments to sufferings and murders of Jews were actually vetoed by the by organized Jewish community in America, like the ADL, for example. I can't remember the precise city, but they said no, we don't want Monument X to the Nazi Holocaust, to the Holocaust victims. So there was in the 40s and 50s quite a bit of silence. Well, obviously after 45, quite a bit of silence. There was a flurry in Nuremberg of interest. After that, there was quite a bit of silence and quite a bit of shame surrounding it. Enough resistance. Of course, you have resistance. You have the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. Everyone knows about it. But you also have like the cases where there isn't resistance. There's passivity, right? A lot of them, frankly. So there's like a sense of shame and a sense of more indifference in culture. And also, I think there's a political element to this. So after the Cold War emerges, there was this kind of attempt at a quasi-rehabilitation of Germany, and you even see this with like Adenauer and early West German politics, and also like the Wehrmacht clean hands myth. So the idea that okay, Hitler was bad, the SS were bad, Himmler was bad, these were all thugs and evil, but the common German soldier was not bad, had a nobility to him, and there was this, and even you see this in films at the time. So there's a film, a very fun film, and a very silly at some level, but also very fun. I actually recommend it to people do not get your history from it. It's called Battle of the Bulge. I don't know if you've seen it.
Heard of it? I've not seen it.
Yeah, it's like a early 60s film. But again, it's about the the Ardennes offensive. But it's the way the Germans are portrayed is not how they would ever be portrayed today, right? There's a nobility and kind of masculine power portrayed in the the German Panzer offensive that you wouldn't see today. And so I think that the politics of the situation where vilifying Germany wasn't really politically expedient once the Cold War breaks up, because you want West Germany to have some level of pride and dignity, right, and nationalism, civil war against communism. And then also the attitude of the Jewish community, which was to see this event as shameful. In terms of historiography, the first major work was written by, can I get the year correct? It was written by, this is why I'm a PhD student, not just a historian, but it was written by Gerald Reitlinger in 1953, The Final Solution. And Reitlinger represented a breakthrough, but not so much in the culture. And there were a lot of blind spots in his research. He didn't have all the documents we have today. He estimated the death toll at a little under 5 million. He didn't have all the evidence we have at hand today. But the big kind of breakthrough that made an impact on popular culture, that filtered onto popular culture, was Raoul Hilberg's The Destruction of the European Jews, published in 1961, which was very controversial. A lot of Jews. So for Hilberg basically uses like social science methods to try to get how many Jews died, where did they die, when did the policy develop. It's like written in the language of a social science journal, right? And there were people in the Jewish community that thought this is the most vulgar exercise you could imagine. So Hannah Arendt, who, whatever people think of her, she's a pretty brilliant woman, I think it's fair to say. She wrote that she wrote a kind of contradictory comment, which I found amusing, but also insightful from to her perspective. But Hilberg's book is brilliant because it's as a matter of like history and empiricism, it is brilliant. But it's also not unworthy of a singed pig. So the idea of compiling how many died, where did they die, how did they die, when did the policies develop, is just, how can you speak about this the way you'd speak about some other kind of social science, But
yeah.
Hilberg's book made a huge impact in academia and was very controversial at the time, as you can see from Arendt's reaction. Arendt, though, and this is, even though I admire Arendt's work, one dishonest thing she did is, for her, I think it became a book, I don't remember, I think it was originally a series of articles, Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she's kind of assessing the Nazi regime in the context of this one man's trial, one mediocre man that she sees as like a door-to-door vacuum cleaner who somehow gets involved with this evil. She actually borrows heavily from Hilberg while she's like bashing him, so that's interesting. But I would say the big breakthrough was Raoul Hilberg in 1961. And then just about put a button on this, in terms of the popular culture, there's at some point a turnaround. So there's at first there's this reaction of shame or indifference or very mild interest. And then by the 1970s, by the 1980s, there's this huge uproar in popular culture about the Holocaust. So obviously in Germany, you get interest with the Auschwitz trial in the 68ers. So you're getting this in Germany too. During Germany, again, there wasn't much discussion of this in the 50s and so on, very little. But in the United States and Britain, this starts to enter into popular culture in the 70s and 80s. It becomes huge by the 1980s. So and to the point where people are kind of retconning, old veterans are kind of World War II veterans are kind of retconning their motives for fighting, right? So essentially, the way we perceive the Holocaust now and its cultural importance to Americans, to Brits, and Germans was not the case immediately after the war.
That is interesting, and I don't think terribly surprising. Germany in the 50s had, I mean, you had to go from being defeated, being destroyed in many ways, being divided, to getting at least the western half and the eastern half in the other direction on a Cold War footing. And you can't really be demonizing your new ally or vassal. That is just simply not going to work. So I think a lot of this, I mean, this is the kind of Adenauer era, in a nutshell. And so a lot of that's not surprising. I mean, we see a lot of that in the, embrace of the Confederacy in the United States. There was a certain arrangement or deal of, we are going to admire you, claim that your generals were the most brilliant gentlemen to ever walk the face of the earth, under the assumption that we, the Yankees, won and we're not going to do this again. And it's a understandable arrangement. And so it doesn't terribly surprise me. I mean, even Adenauer himself is kind of interesting. He's what is it, 20 or 30 years older than Hitler. I mean, you're going back to the previous generation after this disaster. So, but that is very interesting. In terms of a lot of the things, I mean, there are some aspects of the Holocaust which are like clearly fraudulent. These kind of like the soap or the lampshade notions. Were these kind of rumors coming out almost immediately, or is that something that developed? Well, or the gassing itself, was it thought of? Mike said this, and he was right on this one. That when people hear the word the Holocaust, they do think gassing. When did our kind of public perception kind of solidify?
So there were false atrocity claims, but you have to look at so I would reject the idea that it's like false aspects of the Holocaust, because I think Holocaust means like there's an academic definition of the term. Obviously, it's a little confusing, and there's some historians who really dislike the term because of the role of it in popular culture. So that can create some problems. But like soap and so on, a lot of these rumors had bases. So like it's false, as many people believe, that Jews were made into soap. That's not true. But at the Danzig Anatomical Research Center, people were made into soap. Corpses were used to make soap at a very small scale. It wasn't of Jews in concentration camps, but this did happen. So you can see the source of these rumors rooted in hearsay. Shrunken heads were real. The reason we know the shrunken heads were real because of the SS actually investigated this at Buchenwald, and they were upset. They're like, "Don't do this. This is not authorized." So the fact that they're condemning it and investigating it shows that it happened. In terms of lampshades, my understanding is that the artifacts presented as human lampshades were tested and found to be animals. But I just, I think you're going to have war propaganda in every war, and the question is what has a strong evidentiary basis, and this stuff does not. I mean, it's hearsay, it's hysteria, it's fear, it's understandable. These people are horrified, and there's often kernels of truth to them. In terms of the lampshades, though, I would say like against, I don't want to get into some debate nonsense, but like, I mean, they were tested, right? So like they were presented as human lampshades. Yeah, that was a mistake. But they were then tested, and they were found to be animals. So like if there was some conspiracy, the tests would be falsified or whatever, So yeah, I mean there are things that people believe that historians have found to be false. But one thing I would clarify too is it's not Holocaust revisionists or deniers who've drawn attention to this. Only historians have debunked these things, by saying the evidence under mainstream historical epistemic standards, the evidence for, let's say, lampshades or soap of Jews is not there. If that makes sense,
Yeah. No, I understand. If you were to ask a recent high school graduate who's a bit of a dummy, these are the things that he would say. So I'm trying to get at like when public consciousness changed or kind of solidified. Like the word Holocaust, for instance. So was that used by Hilberg, or when did that? Because that is a powerful word. It's a Greek word for burnt offering. So when did that kind of come into saliency?
Well, it certainly wasn't salient after the war. At the time, Hilberg was writing. I believe it wasn't until the 1960s that the term was ever used, and certainly the film that might solidify this as the term for the annihilation of the European Jews was a 1978 made-for-TV film, Holocaust, but with Meryl Streep of all people. That really, I mean, it was already happening before then, but that film really got vast viewership and a lot of sympathy from Americans for the victims, and that really solidified the cultural role of Holocaust. It's also the use of the term. It's this very important TV show. So I couldn't pin the exact date, unfortunately, when the first usages of this were. Definitely not during the war. Definitely not Nuremberg. In the 1960s, it started. In 1978, it kind of is confirmed, this term with the film.
With the film, yeah, that's interesting. So, and then where is it going now? Like, I was born in 1978. I guess the year that film was produced, by coincidence. I certainly can well remember the 90s. I was in high school. I was, becoming aware of these things and so on. That was Schindler's List came out in, what was that, around 94, 95 or so, thereabouts. That was, I would say, peak Holocaust in terms of the public awareness, the prestige Hollywood movies, documentaries, teaching in high schools. But my sense, granted, I'm out of high school now, of course, but my sense is that this is it's on the wane as time passes. But what is going on, say, over the past 25 years in terms of academia, and then I think the public awareness of it is, I think, obvious. But what is going on in terms of academia? Give us a taste of where that is.
I would agree just from reading about the subject that I would guess that when you were a kid in the 90s or 80s or whatever, I'm not sure how old you are, Richard. My impression, actually, I'm almost certain of it, even though I wasn't alive in the 80s, is that this was a much more important issue in popular culture than it is now. I'm not saying it's important now; it still has importance, but I think it is waning. In terms of academia, I think a lot of the debates around the Holocaust have kind of been ironed out. I think there are still some interest, like a lot of interest too, is the broader question of the dissolution of the European Jewish community, like through migration, right? So, and also like kind of fringe questions such as, was there a plan to extend the exterminations outside of Europe, right? That's because Jews in North Africa, for example, were not systematically killed, right? So the question is, well, they weren't. We know they weren't, but was there a plan to do this? So like debates like this, but I would say that research into the big questions, like how many, why did they do it, when were the decisions made, the kind of big questions that even a layperson who's not a historian or a student of history but is just interested in the subject would find compelling. I feel like a lot of the research into those has been, you never say concluded, but it's becoming more and more pedantic as like volumes and volumes of this stuff have compiled, And in terms of the popular culture, so I think it's on the wane, kind of bit in both. For me, what's interesting is the refugee movements, and I actually got interested in this a little bit because of the anti-denial stuff, because like Ryan Falk and so on, people like this were saying, oh, they were all migrated from Europe. But I got and obviously like it's not true, but they migrate in Europe in such a way that can account for the population losses, in other words, right? And that's not true. But there are all these interesting stories which I'm researching as part of my work, my doctoral work, about these Jews who went to British India, right, in the 1930s, or Jews who went to Hong Kong, like 1,000 here, 200 there. It's obviously not the numbers the deniers are going to that's going to help the deniers, but these are interesting stories, right, about the destruction of the Jewish community, not just through murder, but also through forced immigration, right? So yeah, I feel like the big questions have kind of been ironed out. Maybe there'll be some startling new interpretation or revision of this or that element, but I think that the core questions are kind of dealt with. Yeah. So that, I view this as, look, I view my work in denial as not strictly speaking historiography or me acting as a historian training or whatever the hell I am. But I view it as kind of like I have a skill set and knowledge from history, and I can use that for like a popular discourse, which I kind of see anti-denial as, if that makes sense. But no, I think that it's on the way in both. And I think cultural, look, as the survivors, and I have to say, like, I didn't have like a great passion for the subject going in, but I felt like more of a kind of how should I say this, more of a kind of normie passion or interest in the survivors, even stories as well known in our cultures like Anne Frank and so on, who obviously dies in Belsen. But I felt more of that as my work has gone on. But I think generally speaking, where the way the culture is going and historiography is going, I think this is going to be less salient than it was in the 70s, 80s, 90s, where it was huge in all three domains. I mean, one point I make about the historiography is that the deniers are actually correct about, or were, is that before Jean-Claude Persac, who was an ex-Holocaust denier, and he found a lot of documents about Leichenkeller 1, the big gas chamber in Auschwitz-Birkenau, that I cite against Mike, like calling it a gassing cellar for a gassing cellar, the need for hydrogen cyanide detectors, a gas-tight door with a peephole, etc. These were found by him. Before that, we really had very little documentary evidence of like these buildings being gas chambers, right? It was, but we have that now, you know. So it corresponds with the testimonial evidence, that corresponds with the hydrogen cyanide in the ruins of the gas chambers. So like, I feel like the questions have kind of been answered by historiography, if that makes sense. And the cultural stuff, I'm repeating myself, but the cultural stuff I think is also waning.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. So what is the history of so-called Holocaust revisionism or so-called Holocaust denial? So presumably that was a reaction to the historical or historiographic development that we just talked about. But when was this becoming a thing, in other words?
Yeah, so I think you have to distinguish between two things. So there's obviously popular denial, and then there's like intellectuals who engaged in denial. Like professors, and really very seldom. There's almost like no historians who were involved in this. I think the reason for that I'll come to, but they were professors and so on. But popular denial, you know, was a thing among Germans, but became much more of a thing as the Holocaust became more salient and more kind of a source of shame for the Germans. So in the 1950s, denial was fringe. God, I can't remember the name of this book. Very good book. I'm gonna actually look it up. It's not about the Holocaust. It's about Germany after the war. It's a popular history, but it's just so good. So I think your viewers and you would like it. God damn it, I cannot find this. I'll find it. But this book I read recently, which for some reason I'm forgetting right now, I'm gonna find it. But it provided a history and showed very little references to the Holocaust as a source of shame or as a source of denying these crimes. Really, just not much discourse. So this, as a matter of popular discourse, there was very little Holocaust denial among Germans or Americans and so on. And there wasn't a major denial work written either until I believe the first book was the first like work of Holocaust denial, like a comprehensive work. I may be wrong about this. Was The Hoax of the 20th Century by a Northwestern University, still around actually, professor of engineering Arthur Butz. Paul Rassinier, who was a French survivor of a camp, not a death camp. He was held in Buchenwald, so like denier stays a witness or whatever. He's really not, but he published in 1964 the first kind of big denial book. He was, I believe, like a I don't know. I'm not quite sure what his background was, but anyway, he wrote anti-denial. He wrote the denial work, and Arthur Butz wrote it. But the interesting thing is, both intellectually and popularly, denial really explodes at the same time. The Holocaust becomes a much bigger source of pop culture significance. So denial was not really a thing. You had like people like Harry Elmer Barnes, who was, you know, very anti-war and kind of, I think, was sympathetic to denial as a means of deprecating the American war effort more than as like neo-Nazism or whatever. He didn't really comprehensively write in this. He just kind of dog whistled about how he didn't believe it. He was a historian at Columbia University, but the first two, I'd say, intellectuals who wrote about this were Rassinier and Butz. And then you had the foundation of the Institute for Historical Review in 1978. So what's interesting is denial, both at a popular level and at an intellectual level, if you will, came about decades after the war. It wasn't really a thing right after the war. Just as the Holocaust.
Just as discussing the Holocaust wasn't a thing.
Right. I mean, it was to be clear, it was like seen as an uncontroversial statement of fact among like normies that are informed that Hitler annihilated the Jews. That was just seen as like, yeah, he did that. But it wasn't like.
Damn, doggone it, dadgummit, I blew it again, man. Wow, that's embarrassing. I was just dropping brilliant stuff on you. All right, your brain has tricked you into thinking that everything is worse. Great op-ed from the New York Times, June 20th of this year. So why does this happen? Number one, we predominantly encounter and pay attention to negative information about other people. So if you know that I once, wrote a book on the history of sex in film, or I once directed a porn movie, like that was so, in all likelihood, freak you out, repel you, that anything else about me, you don't care to know. Right? So other people's mischief and misdeeds make the news, and it dominates our conversations. Then we have biased memory. So the negativity of negative information tends to feed faster than the positivity of positive information. So getting dumped hurts in the moment, but as you rationalize, as you reframe, and as you distance yourself from the memory, the sting fades. So the memory of meeting your current spouse, on the other hand, probably still makes you smile. So you put these two cognitive mechanisms together, you can create an illusion of decline. So thanks to our biased exposure, things look bad every day, but thanks to our biased memory, when you think back to yesterday, you don't remember things being so bad. So when you're standing in a wasteland, you likely will remember a wonderland. And so the only reasonable conclusion is that things have gotten worse. Now, people tend to exempt their own social circles from decline. People think that the people they know are nicer than ever. So the people we know, we primarily encounter in positive interactions, and then we screen everything else that we learn about them that's not nice through our filter that these people are nice and tend to dismiss negative information about people that we love. So people also believe that moral decline begins only after they arrive on Earth. So people tend to see humanity as stably virtuous in the decades before their birth. So you get these cognitive biases working in tandem, and so our susceptibility to myths of golden ages make more sense, right? We always feel like we're living in dark times, and our biased memory means we always think the past was brighter. So we are susceptible to the promises of aspiring autocrats who claim they can return us to a golden age that exists in the only place a golden age has ever existed, our imaginations. Right, pretty good op-ed there from the New York Times. Sorry for the minute of dead air.
Like, the Holocaust wasn't this big thing used to draw broad political conclusions, if that makes sense, or to draw even derogatory conclusions about the average German. This really changes in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. By the way, these days, interesting. So the IHR is founded in 1978. These days, the IHR has basically given up on Holocaust now. I don't know if you found this, but the director, Mark Weber, has admitted to, he basically has admitted to 2/3 of the Holocaust, and the last third, Auschwitz, he's like, not sure, you know. So the main body to fight for advocate for Holocaust now is kind of thrown in the towel. And I actually have some respect for Weber because, like, I mean, you don't really have anywhere else to go, but you're like, and he has a master's in history. So he looks at the evidence. He's like, you know, I have to say the convergence of evidence is in favor of the mainstream on the mass shootings element and at least the Reinhardt camp's gassing element. Like I mentioned the mass graves at Belzec, you know, I mean, he's not going to say that's a conspiracy, right?
Right.
So, but I would say today denial is dying. So here is dying and thriving. So it's thriving on the far right, people like Mike and so on. But it used to be that there were intellectuals involved in this, not historians. I think there are reasons historians were involved in it, but they were like professors and so on. And guy who's like Fourasson, he's a professor of French literature. So you had intellectuals involved in this.
Yeah.
But I just think that and David Irving was involved in this, right? But I just think that the defeats deniers have had really in open debate, as it were, and in court as well, when David Irving sued Deborah Lipstadt, have been sufficiently devastating that I just think intellectuals have kind of look at this, said like, you know, the case is not there, you know?
Right. But it probably flourishes with, you know, moon landing stuff and vaccine stuff and so on the online far right. It seems to just go. I mean, I don't know if QAnon mentioned this nonsense, but like it would seem to go along with that in an almost like debased form, you know, as opposed to someone who was, you know, acting in good faith, might have had his biases, of course, but was genuinely trying to get at the truth. Now, if it exists at all, it exists alongside, you know, vaccines give you AIDS or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, I debated one of the higher IQ deniers in Thomas Dalton, which is available on the Committee for Open Debate on the Holocaust website. He's really a dying breed. I mean, people who can write, who can at least put on the form of academic discourse. There used to be deniers like that, but I just think they lost their argument, and they're a few now. Like now, denial isn't going to die, but I think it's going to become more and more vulgar. So, for example, the guy debated Dalton, he'd never make this retarded argument you see on the internet, like, oh, the swimming pool or the soccer team. So the soccer team are British POWs, nothing to do with Jews. The swimming pool is in Auschwitz I, where there was no extermination by 1944 when it's constructed, and Jews were killed in Birkenau, nothing to do with Jews. So it's just like, you're going to get memes like the swimming pool and the soccer team, and I think you're going to get less of like the Mark Weber IHR stuff from Gates Pass, if that makes sense.
Right. Who funded IHR in the 70s?
Oh, I'm actually not sure. It was involved with Willis. So like they were trying to watch. Yeah. So, but here's the thing: it's pre-internet, right? So they had some smart people associated with it. Even and they had like extremists like Carto. So they tried to, when they thought they could win the argument, they kind of tried to. And we thought they had some winning arguments, which they obviously don't anymore. They're not engaged in it. They tried to kind of sanitize anti-Semitism because obviously, if you have an empirically compelling argument that, you know, there were no gas chambers or whatever, or that they have, you know, there's some explanation for how these people disappeared other than killing or whatever the case is, or that there's some evidence for a hoax or whatever. I mean, they never made the hoax claim. I kind of trapped Mike on that, but the smart people like said it wasn't because they know they're smart enough to know if you're going to make a positive claim, you need evidence. You can't just say hoax and then give no evidence that the Soviets or the British or the Americans did this. But but to say it's a misunderstanding is also odd. I mean, that relieves you of a burden of proof. Dalton did this. He said it's not a hoax, right? But to say it's even if it was bias, like say there was extreme bias but no attempt to frame them, it just is very strange to me that they would all confess the same thing if there's no conspiracy. But regardless, the IHR was funded by extremists and tried to kind of disassociate themselves from them when they thought in the 1990s that they had a winning argument, and they actually wanted to reach the public and professors. So they tried to kind of sanitize themselves a bit. But you know, I don't think they're very interested in doing that at this point because they've given up on Holocaust denial. You know.
Yeah, I can remember even a kid. I don't know if I've seen clips of this or if I might have even watched it when I was a young man in the 90s. But like David Cole, who is currently a op-ed writer at Talkies Magazine, and Weber, they went on like Oprah or maybe not Oprah, but Montel Williams or one of the lower grade Oprah. Donahue. Okay.
Yeah. So sorry, go finish, Richard. Go ahead.
Well, that's it. They were absolutely trying to reach the mainstream, maybe successfully doing it. They definitely were not presenting themselves as far right in doing that. They were presenting themselves as, you know, we've got this, you know, good news we need to bring to the world, basically. And so I do think that, you know, again, we're just in a very different place right now. with the internet where, and this is something I've talked a lot about it, where there's no mainstream. So, I mean, Donahue wasn't the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, but he was reaching average people, and he was a source of authority. I mean, Donahue was actually an interesting man, the very least in comparison with his colleagues today. He was fired for opposing the Iraq War from NBC, by the way. But anyway, they were reaching the mainstream. I think where we are now is that there's no mainstream. Like the New York Times is all lies in the mind of your average Trump supporter, and many people, Trump supporter or no, they are getting their information from a Facebook group or from a Discord server or something like that. They have this. We're in this kind of place where technological society, as it functioned, has broken down, and there's no mainstream. There's increasingly less of a shared culture, and I think it's both hyper polarized, to be sure, but it's also kind of fragmented. Where I don't want to go too much on this because I want to focus on your stuff, but there's no band that represents Americans, or at least young Americans, that they all agree with is like, they speak for our generation. There were many bands like that. At this point, music is utterly fragmented and people are in their own little echo chambers. And I think they are as well in terms of mainstream discourse. Like there's no way to even reach them. And, so the degree to which discussion about this is going to take place, I think it's going to take place through the mouth of someone like Mike Enoch, maybe at best. And at worst, it will take place in this totally deranged and conspiratorial atmosphere.
Yeah, I agree with that. So first I'll make the point about Cole. So Cole has changed his views, not entirely, but he's changed his views. So Cole has conceded almost all of the Holocaust, but not quite all of it. I'll just explain his. I think I've talked to David a number of times, and I like David, by the way, quite a bit. But so I think I can characterize his views, and I'll post it and tag him, and he can.
He hates me for some reason.
Oh,
I've
really?
never met him. It's very odd. Yeah, he hates me for some reason. He's always like variously taken pisses on me on Twitter. Although I think we still follow each other or something like that. I just find it very
David is the sweetest guy in the world. I
wonder,
maybe like he doesn't like the 2016. I mean, I wouldn't have liked the 2015, 2016 like swaggering. That's super right wing.
fair.
I would have said fuck you. I mean, I told you for example, like I was surprised by how intelligent I consider you to be, because like I guess maybe this is my liberal mind, but the little pieces I saw in 2015, 2016, I'm like, this guy's a meathead frat boy, yeah, and then I'm like, no, he's actually an interesting guy. But anyway, but for David though, I guess you guys need to make up. But in terms of David,
if we do, if we don't, it doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter. But
more
I
interesting
always found it curious though. I was like, oh, this 90s Holocaust revisionist hates me. But make of that what you will.
More interesting. So David is actually a good example, though, of how the smarter ones have kind of run away from their views. So let me go through a couple things. David was right about a couple of things. So one thing David was right about, for example, is there's one building at Majdanek that was identified by the museum and some books as a homicidal gas chamber that it makes absolutely no sense. Like the door literally opens on the inside, for example. And so Majdanek did have gas chambers, but this particular building should not have been labeled a gas chamber, and Cole was correct about that. But for the most part, Cole was wrong, and Cole has been running away from, not running away from, because he's been honest about it, but he's been backing away from the views he took in the 90s without entirely giving up on them. So I mentioned in the Enoch debate and involved debate, I'll just say here, there are like 3 big stages of the Holocaust mass shootings, killing in the Reinhardt camps and killing in Auschwitz. So Cole completely concedes the first 2. He's just totally, he doesn't say Belzec massacre. Like basically when someone like Cole sees like 33 colossal massacres filled with ash, he's like, okay, let's move on. He's not going to say like conspiracy or why they pave over it or
yeah.
I mean, okay, that's weird. But the one thing Cole will not let go of is, so like remember in the Auschwitz debate with Enoch, we were focusing on the big gas chamber, Leichenkeller 1, Kochzeller 1. Cole will not let go, and I think he's wrong on the evidence, but he will not let go of the fact that that was not a homicide gas chamber. And that is the one thing he continues to. He even says Auschwitz there was gassings, but in the bunkers, not the big gas chamber. So Cole is still a revisionist in this regard. He won't let go of that, but he's much more in agreement with the mainstream than he is with like Mike Enoch. And I think I don't want to psychologize him. I will say I'll say this instead of psychologizing him. If I were in Cole's position, I would find it very difficult to say, okay, Leichenkeller 1 was a gas chamber. I was wrong about everything. So everything other than, okay, one building may have been misidentified at my.
So, general question: how serious are Holocaust deniers? And I would say, like most strongly identifying members of an in-group, they are very serious about maintaining their status, usually within their in-group, and by denying widely documented historical events like the Holocaust, they are symbolically burning their bridges to polite society to show how committed they are to their particular cause. So, yeah, I think Mike Enoch and David Cole and Mark Weber, right, I believe they get most of their status from their in-group. And so those people strongly identifying with their in-group, right, they experience the binding nature of ties and the blinding nature of ties. So they care most of all about what their particular in-group thinks of them. And so strongly identifying Orthodox Jews, strongly identifying Christians or Muslims or gays or blacks, all right, they all experience similar forces that propel you to emphasize the victimhood of your in-group and to have fear and to spread hatred of outgroups. That's pretty much how social dynamics work. Whether you're just arbitrarily assigned to group A or to group B, you'll start thinking about ways that group A, whatever group you're assigned to, is superior.
Yeah, whatever. I was wrong about every substantive claim, and I suffered so much for something I was completely wrong about. That's difficult for human.
Yeah, aren't there some who are just merely trolling? Yeah, there are some who are merely trolling. There are some who just deliberately put out a trolling message, say, for people with 100 IQs, but they talk about the matter very differently when they're with the people who have IQs over 120.
I mean, we're vain. We have confirmation bias. We want to look cool. So I'm not saying that's his motive. I'm saying if I were him, I could picture myself struggling with that. But I think he's representative of the fact that, I mean, the guy hasn't like graduated college, but he's smart. I care about whether people are smart. Credentials
he's
are cool,
definitely smart. Yeah,
credentials are cool and they help us figure out stuff. But like Cole's smart. I don't care that you didn't graduate college. David
he's
Irving
so
is
smart that he steals my takes. I've noticed this. Okay, that's a little jab there, but yes, I've noticed that. I was like, well, you seem to hate me, and yet I'll say something and it will appear in your column 3 months later. That's a curious matter. Anyway, I'll leave. I'll leave it at that.
My point about David, I think, would be the point about David would be he's a good example of how the smarter deniers have looked at the evidence and said, well, this claim isn't really justified. That claim isn't really justified. I will say this too about deniers. So, like for example, I'm going to read a quote that was published in a book, Why the Heavens Not Darken, in the late 1980s, which was true at the time, by a Princeton historian. Sources for the studies of the gas chambers are at once rare and unreliable. So that's what he said. That was true at the time. It isn't true anymore. And the reason it isn't true anymore is because primarily of a historian, Jean-Claude Persac, who found the construction documents. He found what he called the criminal traces, references to Lichen Keller 1, which I talk about as a gassing cellar, references to it as a gassing basement, right? References to the hydrogen cyanide detectors. Basically, documents which I used against Mike, which I think discredit the claim that it was a morgue, a preheating system. You want to cook the corpses, apparently, right? So I guess the one thing you have to admit to deniers, which I think people don't want to, but I think is true, is that they did, through their provocations, they spurred more research, which led their claims to be discredited. But probably nobody would have researched it if they hadn't done it. Here's an interesting quote on Persac's book. So Persac's book, Technique and Persac was an ex-denier who basically went to the archives in Auschwitz and found these criminal traces. Right? He found evidence that these buildings were not morgues, they were gas chambers. So this was a review of Persac's book. Persac is a former revisionist. He's convinced the gas chambers did actually exist, and he's not discovering anything new in this. Absolutely nothing. He opens the door of the gas chamber. Everyone knew they were already there. So his work is kind of polarizing, but it's interesting. So like, because mainstream people, something like, okay, we didn't have documents showing that this building was a gas chamber. These documents show that it couldn't have been a morgue. It must have been a gas chamber. So what? Who cares? We all knew they were there already, right? But so whatever one thinks of this research, though, it was definitely prompted by deniers to some extent. It was even carried out by an ex-denier. This guy was a denier, and he changed his mind after going to the construction methods. There also is there are more documents that people haven't read because historians just aren't primarily concerned about this. So, like, for example, a document was found by a Holocaust denier, of all people. I don't remember how many years ago. It was 10, 15 years ago, which it was about a gas-tight door for a delousing chamber, like for non-homicidal gassing of clothes. And the document said this gas-tight door needs to be made exactly like the gas-tight door used for special treatment, Sonderbehandlung of the Jews. And other documents, special treatment is defined as execution. So, like, it's not me making this up. Like Himmler one time says, okay, this special treatment carried out by hanging, this special treatment by shooting. So there's a document that says the gas-tight door for the delousing chamber, non-homicidal gas chamber, should be exactly like that for the gas chamber used for the execution of the Jews. I mean, I don't know what to tell you at that point.
Yeah.
Or I mean, the best thing that Tanya could say is, oh, special treatment means something different in this context. He admits it's a code word for killing because he's one of the very few revisionists left who's like higher IQ, let's say, and works on like archives. It just is like, bro, okay, you can find some case where some German says special treatment doesn't mean killing, but you admit it was a code word for execution. What else could that mean? Special treatment of the Jews with a gas-tight door? Like, it's time to get out the show,
Yes. Let me talk a little bit about where I think this is going, and you can respond. As I was saying before, I don't think we can underestimate the degree to which many normies out there, that is mainstream people, average Americans, have become largely deranged in their views. Now, there's probably a lot of causes of that in economic distress and just this kind of malaise or anxiety, anxious malaise that we all kind of feel about the state of the world in America, all of that stuff. But a lot of it is caused through the internet and through what I was speaking of before, this breakdown of technological society, where the apparatuses of the nightly news, your local paper, the big national papers, just the way that life was, for better and for worse, organized so that society could function and the people could have a sense of up and down and right and left and good and bad and all that kind of stuff. These are breaking down, and people are probably particularly conservatives, but I would say it's across the board, are entering these deranged places. I imagine that Holocaust denial it's not a major force, but I wouldn't be surprised if it cropped up in a lot of these forums, the QAnon type forums places. And I'm not trying to defend them, but I think in a weird way, they might not even do it for anti-Semitic or pro-Nazi reasons. It's just one more conspiracy to throw into the bouquet of, the moon landing, JFK and all that kind of stuff. I think it will still persist with people like Enoch. I think what he is trying to do And I more or less, again, I haven't, I take your word for it. I agree. I've seen this myself. You know a lot more of it than I do. I think in terms of higher IQ people or people who want to use some sort of historical method, I think it is a slowly dying field, and it will probably not be with us, say 25 years from now. But I think it will be with us in an intense way in these deranged forums and with people like Enoch. What Enoch would do, and I think he would actually agree with me if I talked with him about it, is that they view themselves as oppositional to Jewish power. So that's Hollywood, Wall Street, etc. This is, from their mind, this torpedo launched at the USS Israel. If you can debunk the Holocaust, they're gonna wither away or turn to water like the Wicked Witch or something. They feel that this is such a powerful weapon they can use against their enemies, and that is why they do it. And I think from my standpoint, I think it's a very, like, putting aside truth and false claims, I think it's just a bad idea to focus on this or put your eggs in that basket. Like, I'm gonna, the fact that I'm revisionist, something about what I say politically and socially and intellectually is at stake in this. But they will do that, and they have done that. I'm not misrepresenting them. The Holocaust denial isn't just like a curious, hang up. Like I could have an argument about, who's better, Verdi or Wagner or whatever. Whether I win that debate doesn't matter. It's a matter of taste on some level. For them, it's not a matter of taste. I think they have their eggs in this basket in a very curious way. And I also think they feel that it's a silver bullet, if you will, or this just huge ammunition that if they can win on this field, and they might very well win the argument, quote unquote, in the sense of influencing, the far right on podcasts and on 4chan, et cetera. They might very well win the argument on those forums. That will lead them to political power. So it's a means towards an end. That's how I think they think about this question. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, look, my activities have had political salience. So a lot of Jews end up following me on Twitter because they see my activities as fighting anti-Semitism, and I'm happy to do that. Obviously I don't like anti-Semitism, but my biggest the biggest political motivation wasn't that. It was trying to deprogram these people on the far right, who I think, and this is controversial, obviously, for somebody who's in a PhD program who wants to be an academic and be a historian. But like, I think these white boys, as it were, have some grievances with society that are legitimate, and they're being seduced by race hatred and kind of crazy ideology. So I want to reach them and deprogram them. I think I've been effective at that at a very small scale. So in fact, I know I've been effective at that. In fact, during our debate, TRS had to delete comments from a very small minority. I'm not the vast majority of these people fight Enoch one, right? But there were some who thought, and even in the Odyssey channel, you see this. There's some who thought I was more compelling, and that's kind of my goal in this. Try to deprogram 2%, 3%, because you're never going with confirmation bias as it is. Like if Trump debated Biden, you'd never get more than 10% Democrats saying Trump won, or 10% Republicans saying Biden won. But my goal has been to deprogram a small number of these people, maybe the cleverer ones or the ones who may be a little on the fence. And I think I've been successful, although it's exhausting because it's a very toxic place. But no, I mean, if I have a political motive in this, it's been to it's concerned about the far right. I don't think I'm concerned about these people. I think they're a danger to themselves, to others, and I think they have legitimate concerns too. So I think the problem will continue, right? So I guess partly I'm with the left on their analysis. This partly I'm on the right. So I'm on the right in the sense I think they have legitimate grievances, right? I'm on the left in the sense I think that no, it isn't just Fed posting. It's much tried to, by the way, write off like the Nazis as Fed posting like these statements about we're killing 1.2 million.
This bothered me. I mentioned this on Tuesday when we talked about this. Mike Enoch struck me as it's as if he believed the Nazis were TRS members or something, and so it was all about Fed posting or letting off steam or something. It's like, oh, you can't take that seriously. He's just being edgy or whatever. Too.
Right. I mean, the point I made to this though is that, okay, Mike, you're putting your interpretation. I think I made a very good response. There's some things where I'm like, oh God, why didn't I say this? Of course, you get that in verbal debates, but this one I made a good response. Like you're putting your interpretation over Horthy, Hitler's own ally, who was distressed. He was an anti-Semite. He was in the Axis, but he was distressed by the fact, I think morally too, by the fact that Hitler, in his words, as he said to this isn't after the war in some trial, this is 1944, as Hitler's ally, he says to the Crown Council, Hitler reproaches me because I won't allow the Hungarian Jews to be turned over and massacred. It's kind of a tragic thing that he's put in his lot with this person who now wants him to massacre some of his.
Oh, wait. Wait, where's that coming from? Oh, stop that. Okay. Look, Holocaust denial, very bad. There's really anything worse, one thing worse than Holocaust denial, and that's denying the erotic allure of black women. I mean, it's like another Holocaust. It's so bad. Luckily, at HoochieCon, black women's sexual power and agency takes center stage. And I say, amen, about time. Right, taking in the images of black women that adorn the gallery space at HoochieCon, it is clear that the creator and curator, Zorine Truly, 37, has a major soft spot for hoochie mamas. Fly black women who harness the power of their sexuality and creative expression as they see fit. I mean, we've got artful, multi-layered updos reaching for the heavens, big smiles sparkling with gold embellishments, vibrant acrylic nails as imaginative as they are long, nostalgic portraits of friends turning out before the social media boom. I mean, these women may not have an abundance of money. They may not be, conventionally considered erotic. But it's about time that our society atones for the sins of the past and starts mandating that every attractive white man pair up at least for a year with the hoochie mama. I mean, I think this would be the most meaningful act of reparations that we could do. I mean, what a rich legacy. I mean, think about the moody bisexual lighting that promises a good time. Think about the joy of discovering and embracing your authentic self and sexual agency. I mean, there was something for everyone at this event. The lovely Denny Daniels here posing for a portrait at HoochieCon. And just some amazing art on display. I mean, it's time to give respect and reverence to women who pioneered popular culture for so long without reaping any of the benefits or even receiving credit. Not only did they pioneer it, they also had to suffer for it, had to suffer to wear the hair they wanted to wear, had to suffer for wearing the nails they wanted to wear, the gold teeth, and to be sexually liberated. They had to suffer to shine. Why did they ever take it away? I mean, at HoochieCon, you get to be yourself no matter how other people judge you. At HoochieCon, you get to be happy with how you look. You get to be happy with how you feel, how you dress, the choices that you make. And you can be fully yourself no matter what that looks like. And you can still be worthy of good things. Just words to live by. Here's
at Birkenau.
Well, there was more than just Jews that were there, right?
So why hydrogen cyanide detectors in an air raid shelter?
Why? Well, because according to Prasak, the explanation for this is that they might have been at one point having a delousing chamber there to delouse dead bodies.
Jews at Birkenau.
Well,
okay, this is History Speaks with Mike.
Bureaucratic. Your people were approving this. They were approving
right, and so were yours. So were the British.
Society on.
So we're making it
saying,
sadistic.
These are all the children we've killed. There was clearly bureaucratic. Your people were approving this. They were approving
right, and
kids.
so were yours. So were the British.
Society. Okay, that the vast majority of Jews in the occupied Soviet Union they have shot. Is that wrong? Are they wrong or wrong?
I don't know. I'd have to look at it.
Okay, I sent that to you in 2021. So good job looking wrong when they. There is a positive evidence they want to frame the Germans. One whistleblower, one document. Give me one.
Why is that necessary? Why one document? All the fake documents. All of the
British and Americans. There is a positive evidence they want to frame. Why does Belzec have 33 colossal mass graves with ash corresponding?
I don't agree with that characterization.
So it's just Nazi napkin math. The archaeologists.
You're saying there's evidence of 15,000 people. The claim is 600,000.
Mike, the 15,000. You said this in your podcast. 15,000 is unburnt people. There's
right. Well, unburnt. Well, there's okay.
Ash,
so then
the ash corresponds. The concentration of ash in the colossal mass graves corresponds to hundreds of thousands of corpses.
Yeah, I don't buy that.
Discredits. Yeah, you just don't buy it because you're a conspiracy nut. I mean,
why did they pave the whole thing over?
Why are the archaeologists wrong? Why
did they pave the whole? Because they had a motive to be. Okay, why did they pave the whole thing over with rebar and like stone and that crap? And in fact,
why does those are colossal cave-like mass graves, and they indeed did accommodate hundreds of thousands of victims to who, to a great extent, were emaciated children. So this completely, the COLA study just completely destroys you guys. The ash concentration alone corresponds to hundreds of thousands of victims. You can work out the mathematics, as the archaeologists have done. So it's just this is completely devastating to your theory. I mean, the vast majority of people, in the sense of ashes as well, are still in the ground there. So
okay, sure,
destroys you.
Yeah,
spatial.
Use your stupid fucking.
Saying there's a hoax to frame the Germans. You have none. You've got nothing.
Why the hell would they say it?
Thank you. Those are colossal cave-like mass graves, and they indeed did accommodate hundreds of thousands of victims to who, to a great extent, were emaciated children. So this completely, the COLA study just completely, and the Americans framed them too. You did in this debate. Is there any positive evidence for that? Positive evidence. One witness.
Positive evidence is that the positive evidence is that the claims they make are false.
So you have no positive evidence for the
claims they make are false. I don't need
Katyn is positive evidence.
Look, a pile of bullshit that is collected by a government is evidence the government is fucking lying. What are you talking about?
Nihilism.
Positive evidence is the shit that's not true that they have.
You have no evidence for your house theory. Zero. No positive evidence. Just turn off my mic. What is your positive evidence for the British?
The positive evidence is the piles and piles of bullshit and crap that they've collected to make. No, it's not negative. No, it is absolutely positive evidence because these allegations exist. They're not true and they're repeated. That is the hoax.
You have no positive evidence. Is there? Do you have one witness?
That is.
Is there one witness?
No, because I don't need to use your stupid fucking.
Saying there's a hoax to frame the Germans. You have none. You've got nothing.
Why the hell would they say it?
Where is the city of the millions of Jews who disappeared in the camps?
Russia, Soviet Union.
Okay, so you believe basically a population of Jews akin to a nation?
No.
The Nazis
I don't know
had data in how many Jews were deported and how many Jews were in the camp system by mid-1940s.
Right, and there's no evidence that those people were gassed.
You have no explanation for it. None. No alibi.
Well, then those people were deported.
Where?
To the
they
east.
Weren't in the camps.
Right, they were deported to the east.
Okay, where in the
That's
east?
what they said. I mean, that's what the Nazis said.
You believe these millions of people went to some civilization or city that supposedly existed, if you have no evidence?
Well, I don't necessarily know if there's an accurate document that they actually aren't alive.
You just said they were sent to the east out of the camp system. Where is the city of the millions of Jews who disappeared in the camp?
Russia, Soviet Union.
Okay, so you believe basically a population of Jews akin to a nation?
No.
Suppose we go with your ridiculous assumption that it's no evidence. Why did he say 3 million Jews have been killed by 1940? Is he lying? Does he want to hurt the Palestinians by justifying the Holocaust? Why did he say it? Why did he write this? Was he coerced by the Arab publisher? Why did Al-Husseini say that?
I don't care. Who knows? Maybe he liked the idea. Maybe he thought it was cool to kill Jews. I don't know.
So he just made it
But
up.
I do know that it's hearsay.
He made it up.
I don't know if he made it up. Maybe he heard it. Maybe he misheard. Maybe he made an error. There's lots of explanations.
I think it's a really weak
The question is this, Matthew.
Why
the question? I don't care what you think. The question is this: did he say they were gassed? Did he say Himmler said they were gassed?
Why did he say it? Suppose we go with your ridiculous assumption that it's no
cares?
evidence. Why did he say 3 million Jews have been killed by 1940? Is he lying? Does he want to hurt the Palestinians by justifying the Holocaust? Why did he say it? Why did he write this? Was he coerced by the Arab publisher? Why did Al-Husseini say that?
I don't care. Who knows? Maybe he liked the idea. Maybe he thought it was cool to kill Jews. I don't know.
So he just made it
But
up.
I do know that it's hearsay.
He made it up. What does the Einsatzgruppen report show? How many shot?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look at it.
Those alone are over 1 million. I sent them to you.
Okay, fair enough.
Over 1 million? Okay,
All right.
so over 1 million Jews shot.
All right. How many of them were, partisan?
What does the Einsatzgruppen report show? I'm just
in
playing
my
you live
speech
10 seconds ago. And now
that I just said.
Okay.
Nothing that I posted had anything to do with the Holocaust.
I'm just
in
playing
my
you live
speech
10 seconds ago. And now
that I just said.
And I sent Mike, and the link I sent Mike. That's what his testimony was. So the testimony corroborates the contemporary. Let's also look at the documentary evidence. So a 2 September 1942 edition of Johann Kramer's diary described Auschwitz as an extermination camp and described how he witnessed a special action. So that was his diary. And Mike's smiling. He later testified, and Kramer later testified after the war that he was referring to gassing of Jews. And I showed this in a document I sent Mike, and the link I sent Mike. That's what his testimony was. So the testimony corroborates the contemporary. Let's also look at.
Okay, let's get something positive here as we start winding up the show for today.
Herb, and I'm an alcoholic.
This is Herb talking about how he used step 7 to overcome adultery.
Happy to be here and chat about step 7. It's interesting listening to Tom, and I made a connection tonight, actually, and he read something I've read many times and I've heard being read many times, and he made a very big point of talking about humility, and it's in the letter on emotional sobriety. And it's interesting to me that the step 7 begins with humbly, and step 7 in the 12 and 12 is a wonderful treatise on humility, and Alan made the point.
So what is humility? And the best explanation that I've heard is that humility is accepting reality. So reality might mean in certain situations you need to step up and lead. Reality might mean you need to stop live streaming and start deep cleaning the carpet in your room. Reality might mean you can do a trade, so someone else deep cleans your carpets while you read a book and give them money. Or reality might mean that you need to just take orders, wear a white shirt, wear a suit and tie, and do what you're told for 40 hours a week, right? Humility means living in reality, acceding to reality, so that when you're in like a daily conversation with someone, you check in with them whether they are interested in what you have to say. Unless you're getting some nod or some sign that they're interested in what you have to say, you have to zip.com.
To keep us in focus in terms of what we're doing here, that we're looking at the steps in relationship to self-esteem, and we're looking at 6 pillars of self-esteem. And interestingly enough, when I glanced at the book itself, he actually has a 7th pillar at the end of the conclusion of the book, which is willingness. And it so ties wonderfully into step 7. My experience with step 7 is that
Chad says carpet is not the most hygienic choice of flooring, but it's a lot more comfortable to sleep on carpet than to sleep on a wooden floor. So I tried so many ways to become a better person. I tried to become a Christian missionary when I was a kid. That was my aim. I was going to go to deepest, darkest Africa and India, save souls for Jesus. I tried to become a world champion marathon runner. I tried to become a great journalist. I tried to become an economist. I tried to become a Jewish evangelist, convert to Judaism and take ethical monotheism to the world, to embody Dennis Prager's teachings and try to teach the world how to be good. I embraced, what else did I embrace? Kundalini yoga. I've read hundreds of self-help books, and nothing worked. 10 years of therapy, nothing made any substantial change till Alexander technique started to soften me up from my habitual reactions to life that weren't serving me. So I had way too much body armoring going on. So I was not alive and present to the present moment. And then finding a 12-step community with people who had similar crippling emotional addictions to myself. When I saw the havoc that, various emotional addictions, such as with relationships, with work, with money, with betting, how they crippled and hampered and held down my life, just coming to terms with that enormous sense of loss. How, despite the best of intentions, I just remained the same basic maladaptively selfish person who kept getting in his own way, no matter what self-help techniques I tried. But finding a 12-step community, finding sponsorship, finding steps, finding tools, finding principles, finding prayer and meditation that actually spoke to me, that from just my experience was the one thing that enabled me to start to be able to live at ease with myself. So now, as a guiding principle for my life, I try to make choices that diminish my tendencies to loathe myself. So I want to be building self-respect as I go through the day. That's my overarching principle.
At 4 years of sobriety, I met a man who was a mechanic with the big book, and for the very first time understood that it is a textbook with precise directions in there as to how to apply the steps. But regardless of my education, etc., I was not able to read it on my own, and he was the one that unpacked it, allowing me to see that pathetic Herbie here in the cartoon.
So there are all sorts of books that I can't really much appreciate on their own. So if I just dip into the Torah, it doesn't really do much for me. If I just dip into the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, it doesn't do much for me. If I just dip into Shakespeare, it usually doesn't do much for me. I need commentary. I need commentary to unlock what's in the text and get teachers to explain things to me.
Is in addiction jail, the bondage of addiction, but that the real bondage was the bondage of self, unmanageability. And I didn't know that the 12 steps are a process, a methodology, certainly created to deal with alcohol and then expanded to deal with addiction in the broadest of senses. But my own experience now and perspective on the 12 steps is that it's a human development process for freedom, because it's a process that allows me to develop a relationship with power, those first 3 steps. You could put the word God in there. I didn't. I just used the word power because I think it's the best representative word for what I need, a relationship with power other than myself, to be determined by myself. You could use the term life there with a capital L. You could use the term higher self there.
So we often talk to people on this show who are going on all sorts of self-improvement tips. They need to lose weight. They need to work out more. They need to read more books. They need to earn more money. They want to volunteer more. But where do you get the power to sustain these intentions? That lack of power was holding me back. So I primarily get power from my relationships with other people, from working with people, sponsoring people, being sponsored, talking to people who suffer from the same crippling emotional addictions that I do, having that kind of concrete community where we share experiences, strength, and hope. That, for me, is a source of power that I'd not previously known on an ongoing basis. And that has enabled me to overcome things that were previously holding me back, such as I'm 10 years no FAP.
But this process leads us then to steps 4 through 7, which is establishing a relationship with myself. I had no idea.
Right. I want a relationship with myself that is not self-loathing. It's not filled with self-hatred. It's not filled with contempt and disgust and revulsion. So today, to the best of my knowledge, right, I haven't done much that I would loathe myself for. Like, I screwed up. There are a couple of minutes of dead air. So I had dead air on 2 occasions, which were unnecessary if I'd simply executed better, paid more attention, done more preparation. Right, I wouldn't have had those moments of dead air, but I don't hate myself for it because, guys, what is 2 minutes of dead air in what is an otherwise scintillating 2.5-hour show?
I had low self-esteem because I was in the delusion of my grandiosity and bondage of my narcissism until I did this.
So I got up at, I think, 3:06 a.m., took a shower, had my weekly cup of coffee, and then worked on my Dennis Prager story, right, how I came to find Dennis Prager, the effect that he had on my life. So it's a blog post. So I worked on that, worked on my Decoding Dennis Prager blog post, did some exercises, ate my brekkie, made a few notes for this show, right? And I got my washing done. The washing's in the dryer right now, right? 3 weeks of washing just piling up. I had no clean undies left, right? It was getting serious here, and now my washing's in the shower. My washing's in the dryer. I'm going to be able to pull it out in about half an hour, fair dinkum, put it away, satisfying morning. And coming up at 2:30 p.m. my time, I've got Ronnie Goldman, the philosopher and attorney, coming back, and we're going to talk about understanding the different philosophies that the left and the right apply to things such as COVID response, and to issues of transsexuals.
This work. And today I made a connection that I'd never made before.
So do I ever hang laundry out to dry? No. But that is the norm in Australia. In Australia, almost everyone hangs their laundry out. That was one of the shockers when I went back to Australia after high school. In America, everyone I knew put their laundry in the dryer. But in Australia, almost everyone I knew put their laundry on the line, and they only used their dryer in emergency. I assume because the price of electricity was relatively like 3 times or 4 times as much in Australia compared to America. But almost nobody I know in Los Angeles or anywhere I've lived in the United States have put their clothes on the line.
Steps 4 through 5, inventory and full disclosure, that changed my perception. But step 6 and 7 changed my behavior. Yeah.
So Curious Gazelle says, throat chakra 40, your words and your actions are not aligned. So do I have all sorts of weird interfering tension patterns going on around my lips, around my throat, in my neck, face, head, neck, back relationship? Let me just take a pause, let go of everything that I think I know. Move from a place of judgment to a place of just perceiving, just noticing what's going on without the need to judge it. Seeing both sides of the room simultaneously and everything in between, softening my eyes, softening my attitude.
Right. It was an insight I had never had, 39 years sober, doing this work many times, but thinking about what we're going to be talking about tonight. Step 7, humbly asked. That's prayer. Prayer doesn't change God. Prayer changes the prayer by making me more conscious. to remove our shortcomings. In step 6, we saw we're powerless. In step 4, we saw we're powerless. In step 2, we saw ourselves powerless. Each of those.
Yeah, I think the issue is lack of power. Now, some people might be able to get their power from burning special scented candles. Other people might be able to get their power just from their iron discipline. They have to do 50 pull-ups every morning. Other people will get their power from someone who loves them, from family or from a relationship. Other people may get their power from the esteem of people in their life, or being part of an elite community, or being part of an elite profession. But where do you get your power, right? You need power to do difficult things. And it's difficult to overcome one's maladaptive responses to reality.
Even steps, the naming steps. And each of the odd steps, decision steps to take some action. And this action in step 7 is in fact a prayer. It's so...
Curious Gazelle says, gardens are a concept in Australia. That's why you can hang laundry outside to dry. LA horticulture is far too prim and proper and fake with their fake grass. Well, there are a lot of beautiful gardens in Beverly Hills, in particular, Beverlywood, Bel Air, Santa Monica. But you'll see beautiful gardens, lush landscaping, but no one's hanging their clothes out to dry.
Simple a step that there's only one paragraph, page 76, the second paragraph in the big book. And the entire paragraph is just a prayer. But it does begin, my creator, which is an interesting perspective on what we're addressing here. At least my take on it is, oh, this is my structure. This is who I am. I'm built with these instincts. Bill says instincts gone awry.
Curious Gazelle says, yes, exactly, 40. You don't want to cheapen the lavish landscaping look with laundry. People in the west side of LA, they're just too prim and proper. So Los Angeles used to be the most white Anglo-Saxon Protestant city in the United States. Like prior to World War II, Los Angeles was the most WASP city in the United States, and it's since become much more diverse. But the WASP heritage still has a profound effect.
He says self will run riot. Yes, I've seen that in step 4, and it got confirmed in step 5. And I looked at my step 6 to see how it manifested my behavior.
And in the United States, a lot of condos and co-ops explicitly prohibit hanging laundry outside.
Step 4 was identifying these obstacles for the very first time.
That was absolutely life-changing for me when I did a step 4, when I listed out everyone I resented. So there were even family members there. There were close friends. There were ex-friends. There were rabbis. There were ex-girlfriends. There were people who had mocked at me and made fun of me. There were all sorts of people I've gotten into feuds with. And then seeing the significant role that I played in creating all these resentments, how I'd stepped on other people's toes and then they retaliated. That was life-changing. And that all went down in about 2 hours. And something like June of 2013 or June of 2012. And I think it was a permanent emotional correction that I experienced that day.
Embarrassed in my own presence, seeing the delusion of my beliefs, the corruption of my motives. I am not being exaggerating. In fact, I'm understating my...
Right. So at age 57 now, I don't want to subscribe to any causes because I'm just going to bring discredit upon them. If I join any movement, all right, my critical brain is going to take over and I'm going to start to feel an undeniable need to publicly critique, whatever I've joined. I will feel this overwhelming need to, read whatever supposedly rebuts or refutes, my latest allegiance. So I enjoy being part of communities. I tend to step away from being part of activism. I'm much more comfortable standing back and trying to analyze things rather than promoting anything.
Embarrassment and my reaction to seeing the truth for the very first time 4 years sober, especially once I disclosed it out loud.
Am I on good terms with all the people I listed on my resentment list? I would say most of the people on my resentment list, they're not in my life. So people I've had fallings out with, I usually haven't repaired them to the extent that they are, ongoing relationships. So certainly didn't reach out to ex-girlfriends and try to, repair the damage. I thought that'd probably do more harm than good. Let them get on with their own lives, their own loves, their own their own families. On a number of occasions, it did bring about a healing in the relationship. But most people who were primarily on my resentment list, there was no grand reconciliation. But I did see my role, and so I was able to kind of climb off my high horse, and it enabled me to just be more effective at navigating reality. But there weren't a lot of tearful reunions.
Reading my step 4 out loud, which I had accumulated and written over several months, but sitting there reading it to a man who witnessed it, reading it consecutively and out loud, within an hour or two, it washed over me as to not only the embarrassment of the impact of my behavior on myself, but more especially the impact of my behavior on other people. I had never seen it the way I saw it at that moment. And over the weekend, I put a list of...
Okay, comment in the chat. Laundry hung out to dry in LA would get stained by the smog. Recently mentioned the song Everybody Wants to Change the World. Now it's Everybody Wants to Rule the World. Tears for Fears. Does everyone want to rule his own world? Well, I think the more agency we feel, the happier we are. So people, generally speaking, the less agency they feel, the more unhappy they feel. So when more and more of your life is not under your control, such as having a long commute and you don't get to determine traffic patterns and accidents, right? The more of your life that is outside of your ability to have a say in what's going down, I think generally speaking, people feel less happy. People want to be able to rule their own world in the sense that they want to be able to go a day without hating themselves, without creating reasons to hate themselves. So it's really important to me that like all the actions I take kind of work together, and yeah, I'll inevitably make mistakes here, but overall, to the best of my knowledge, there aren't these powerful opposing streams flowing through my life. Like how I make money, how I pray, how I study Torah, the things I do on a live stream, the things I write on a blog, how I spend my spare time, the friends I hang out with, the community I'm in, the dating that I do, it all pretty much largely works together. They're not like, it's not like just opposing forces just constantly going to war. So I want to be stacking up wins through the day, from stacking up wins in prayer, meditation, the cold shower, the exercise, eating decently, earning money, meeting my responsibilities, having some fun, intellectual stimulation, getting in 12-step meetings, 12-step sponsors, talking to people in 12-step programs, and reading the books and the articles that I want. I feel like for at least six years or so, these things have largely worked together in my life. And as I experience my life, it just keeps getting better over the past 6 years. It's not like my life is just some, inexorable march uphill, but the last 6 years is consistently getting better, paying off credit card debt, developing savings, developing skills.
The character defects together, which were pretty visible, and spent some time in meditation listing them. Not to punish me.
Yeah, internal conflict is exhausting. Yeah, and that's what used to characterize my life. My internal dialogue would go something like this: "You stupid mother effer, you're the dumbest effer around. Boy, you really effed this up. But why can't you just be normal?" Right. So I was just constantly at odds with myself, with my own best interests, just running around in circles, like trying to be an Orthodox Jew while also writing about the pornography industry on a daily basis, trying to get married while simultaneously banging everything female that would allow me to have a go. That was not conducive to calm, to liking myself, to thriving.
Not to shame me, not to guilt me. No. To identify. So okay, so what are the...
Yes. Is there a certain turning point I identified? Yes. The first beginning turning point when I went to a 12-step program to do with love addiction and porn addiction and sex addiction. But that was a turning point, but it was mild to moderate. The turning point was the first time I went to Debtors Anonymous and 12-step programs that dealt with under-earning. and how do you relate to money and to work and to earning and prosperity. So that happened in May of 2015. That was a huge turning point in my life, because after that I was able to start tracking my earnings, tracking my spending, and making those minute notes, right, on paper, then on my computer. It gave me a greater feel of mastery of my life, that I was on top of what was going on in my life. I was on top of my finances, and I had a community that supported me in that. So my life dramatically began to improve in May of 2015 with my first 12-step programs dealing with debting, earning, under-earning, prosperity.
The moving parts of this machine called Herb, I was willing to have them all removed. I mean, that's what the essence of step 6 is, to remove the shortcomings. I was willing to change. Ask yourself, are you willing to change? Do you?
So getting a sponsor, right, the various sponsors I had, they were not turning points. They were useful, but they were not turning points. It was getting into the program and doing the work on my own, but with a community and with people that I'd turn to for guidance. But getting us the times that I got a sponsor, they weren't huge turning points. I was already so committed that I take notes with pretty much every 12-step meeting I attended, and then I try to take 1 or 2 things out of every 12-step meeting that I attended and apply them to my life. And it gave me the energy that I hadn't had before. So in those early stages of 2015, 2016, 2017, I was jumping on 2-3 meetings a day, listening to recorded talks, and it gave me the strength and the energy to go from working 20 to 30 hours a week to working 40 to 60 hours a week. 2016, I was able to double the money that I was earning, and then triple the money I was earning compared to 2015. And so then life really started taking off.
Accept that you're powerless over your inclination. Are you powerless over your behavior and somewhat responsible for it?
Yeah, so walking into a room with fellow love addicts, fellow sex addicts, fellow porn addicts, that was huge. Like, it just kind of calmed down my system. It's like, yeah, I'm not the only screw up around here. I was able to identify with everything, with everyone, with at least one thing that they shared. And so that calmed my central nervous system. It's like, I'm home. There was a book from my childhood that just had such great resonance to me, just the title. I don't think I read much of the book, but it was called A Place for You by the Christian psychiatrist Paul Tournier, A Place for You. So that need that there's a place for me is just so important for me. And I found that in 12-step programs. So then finding 12-step programs that dealt with poverty, debting, under-earning, underachieving. Oh, just such a relief that other people had the same problems that I did, and they'd found a way out. And it wasn't that complicated, right? I could do it. Like, I saw what they were saying, I saw what they were doing, and I applied what they were saying and doing to my own life, and it worked. And then I got excited about that, and I passed it on to other people. And as I passed it on, that also filled me up with more sense of power and agency.
These were the two insights that I had at that time. I remember it so clearly, 1988.
I remember I was so excited by, I think, for the first meeting of Debtors Anonymous, I was just dying to get out there and look for a better job right away. And then I was just dying to come back to the group and say, oh, this program has really changed my life. I went out there and got a better job because I had people that I could, share this with, and who'd celebrate it with me. And, we, celebrate things together. We were like people who'd survived a plane crash. That's like, you'd think that would be an intense bond. Well, if you've overcome debting and under-earning and the poverty mindset, then if you've overcome that together, it creates a powerful bond.
I went into the room to pray the prayer for the removal of my deep resentments. But I had learned something. I was ready. I believed in the power of God. I knew that this was blocking these character defects, these manifestations of resentment and fear and dishonesty and selfishness, all of the areas that I had looked at in step 4 and their manifestations in my behavior in a variety of ways. I may have had 30 or 40. And I distilled them down to see that, in fact, the exact nature of these were coming out of my instincts, my primal survival instincts of fight, flight, and freeze. These were the obstacles to me, my relationship with myself. I was willing to pray, and I prayed the prayer from the book. The next day I was very...
So as long as I was masturbating to pornography, I didn't get much recovery, right? As long as porn was in my life, I didn't get to sustain much of a relationship with God, with holiness, with holy community. It just kind of fed my self-hatred, self-loathing, which made my relationship with myself more difficult and my relationship with other people more difficult. And it just wasn't possible for my life to take off when I was in the grip of pornography.
Very clear that I still had these character defects. I went to a meeting, my men's stag meeting, which is a crosstalk meeting on the steps, and I heard somebody.
So normally in a 12-step meeting, there's no crosstalk, right? You don't give advice when other people share. You only share from your own experience. But in those rare 12-step crosstalk meetings, you're allowed to give advice if it's coming from your own personal experience.
Somebody shared that they prayed specifically for the removal of a specific character defect. It's not in the book. It's not in the 12 and 12. It hadn't been talked about in the meeting, but this was his experience, and I listened to it because he got free. Prayed specifically for the removal of a specific character defect. Was I willing to do that? Well, I went home and I thought about it for a day or two. Don't want to rush into anything like that.
So my life was crippled by this inner compulsion I had to try to manipulate most interactions so that I got the maximum of attention. And by attending these 12-step meetings, even more powerfully than 10 years of therapy, it kind of calmed down my central nervous system. So I felt a little less intense need to extract the maximum of attention out of every interaction. So I got to calm down a little bit inside, which made my interactions with other people less needy and less attention-seeking, which enabled them to feel more relaxed being with me. And then as other people felt more relaxed and content to be around me, I had less need to act out and extract attention. So it kind of formed a virtuous cycle.
And I went into my room and I shut my door. I didn't want to have anybody in my house. I'm full family, wife and 3 children, teenagers. Don't want to see them on my knees. This man had said, get on your knees to pray the prayer and pray it specifically. We get on our knees not to get God's attention, he said, but to get our own attention, to have a consciousness of what our intention is. We get our attention to our intention. Nice play on words. Spend some time with that. And I went to pray the prayer. And I had to stop because I couldn't pray it specifically for the removal of a specific character.
And Joe says anybody saying that they had a personal relationship with Aphrodite would be deemed mad. But there are all sorts of mad things that you can claim that are often adaptive, right? So, believing that you're a very important person, believing that the importance of your live stream is greater than it really is, that's probably adaptive for me, and that it gives me strength and energy to do a live stream. So we're all the center of our own worlds. We all tend to imbue our own lives with, greater significance than it really has. So that's, probably a delusion that is adaptive. So most delusions are maladaptive. Some delusions are adaptive.
Character defect. Because I wasn't willing at all. I was too invested in this behavior. And I paused, remembering the step 6 suggestion that if we're not willing, we pray for the willingness, and I prayed for the willingness. Just a simple prayer. I prayed the prayer from the big book, my creator. I needed to be recreated. And I called the man who took me through the steps and I told him about, I got on.
So have you experienced like this endless desire to be rid of an unwanted self, so that you just go on a cavalcade of, self-help programs and spiritual programs and religious changes and, fitness changes and, change geography, change profession, change friends, change sexual orientation. Okay, I didn't go there, but I'm sure people, have messed around thinking, oh man, it's just so difficult relating to the opposite sex. Maybe everything would be easier, if I just, related to the same sex. But if you ever get to calm down, you ever get to feel safe, then you have less need to act out and to sabotage your best interests.
On my knees, and I wasn't willing, and then I was willing, and then I prayed, and he said, wow, what a great insight. You discovered that you weren't willing. He said, now stop the behavior.
So I heard all my life about having a relationship with God, loving God, and it just was too much, right? I heard it so often it just became a cliche. So I find it much more meaningful most of the time to think about having a relationship with reality. Having a positive relationship with reality, recognize and respecting reality, recognizing that reality is not going to change to adapt to me. I have to constantly adapt and change myself in the face of reality, which is just another word for God.
And he gave me a new insight. I'm powerless over the inclination, but I'm 100% responsible for how it manifests in my life.
Right. So I have all sorts of self-destructive impulses, towards sexual promiscuity, to attention seeking, to excitement seeking. Those are my impulses. I am responsible for managing my life so that those impulses don't wreck me and wreck others. So I may not have much direct control when those impulses get really, intense. What I need to do is create a series of situations and states whereby those impulses are mild. And if I have some other impulses that I can ratchet up in intensity, such as, doing my job, exploring ideas that are interesting to me, building on my friendships and relationships and, sense of community, then the adaptive impulses become more intense and more powerful than the maladaptive impulses, and life gets better.
Am I willing to be accountable? He said, this is how it's going to work. You pray every day for the change in your income.
Okay, sorry, I missed a question from Curious Gazelle about cousins. All right. So, do I think cousins are competitors? So in my life, because my parents, my mother and father and my stepmother all essentially became alienated from their families as they converted to this strange religion of Seventh-day Adventism, I have grown up not really understanding what a cousin is, kind of struggling with the whole concept of aunts and uncles. So due to my parents being largely alienated from their families, I was largely alienated from extended family. So extended family played very little role in my life. And so I had to constantly ask, what is a cousin? What is an aunt or uncle? What does that mean? So I have not experienced desire to compete with cousins because extended family just hasn't been there in my life. So normal human connection is frequently just a foreign language for me. Also because I moved to the United States with my parents at age 11 and all my extended family lives in Australia. I just haven't had much to do with them. So with WASPs, I think are the one people where they don't live for their children. It's the most individualist culture of which I'm aware. And family seems to play a weaker role than it does in almost any other culture that I know well, such as traditional European, Middle Eastern cultures and traditional Asian cultures. So when my therapist would ask me, are you close with your family? I'd say about, average close for white people. Because we were, probably closer than your typical family that, typical urban family that is, highly disrupted, but less close than traditional European and Asian families. So yeah, competing with your extended family or feeling highly competitive with your extended family, I think that would be maladaptive for most people. You'd probably be better off having a sense of what you have in common with your family and your extended family and your friends and your community. Focusing on that, focusing on win-win solutions.
Inclination and behavior. And every day you call me and you tell me how.
WASPs not living for their children, is this good or bad according to you? I think it's probably, I'm not sure. I see many benefits to it because it is often off-putting when you see, parents seemingly over invested in their children and just desperately needing to tell you that their children went to Harvard or Princeton, or just, constantly boasting about their children. I would never have wanted my parents to show up to any of my athletic contests or to, anything I was doing publicly. It would have been incredibly embarrassing to me. I mean, this idea that my parents would drive me to practice is just a foreign language to me. I would leave the house at 7 a.m. and, I'd come home at 5 p.m. And, that time was largely my own. And so helicopter parents, living through me, parents saying, okay, we'll pay for your college, but only if you study what I want you to study. That just seems suffocating to me. But then I'm coming from an experience of a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant upbringing. So that is what's normal to me, to the extent that whatever I had is normal. So a lot of people said to me, I'm so sorry you didn't get a normal upbringing. You would not have had to go on all these, weird adventures and change your religion and, go on all these self-improvement kicks if only you'd grown up in a normal home.
How you're behaving. Not in the book. It's not in any writing I've ever read, but it was my experience. Within 24 hours, the behavior changed, never returned. Within 24 hours, the behavior changed and it never returned. The inclination stayed with me for 2-3 years. I don't actually remember. It's 30 years ago. But I continued to pray every day specifically for the change, not only in the inclination and the behavior. I called him once a week because it wasn't necessary to call him once a month.
So he's talking here about overcoming adultery. So he had a high-paying, fairly prestigious position, and so he had access to a lot of women. He was in sales. I'm sure there are adaptive ways of competing with your siblings, competing with your family, competing with your extended family, right? There are adaptive and healthy ways to do competition, and there are maladaptive and unhealthy ways to do it. So I guess it depends on the individual, the situation, the family.
And I called him once a month later on, but eventually even the inclination went away.
I like what Glib Medley says. 40 was a coach's son on God's ball field. Yeah, I was a preacher's kid, so everything I did got reported back to my preacher daddy, and he would see me largely through the lens of how did I reflect on his Christian mission. So I remember if I'd fall down and scrape my knee, my dad would yank me up and say, "Oh, he's fine, he's fine." I couldn't answer for myself, right? I couldn't express that I was experiencing some pain. Oh, he's fine, because once you're with Jesus, you're not nearly as susceptible or vulnerable to pain. He wanted to show that, I was tough and that, I had a good relationship with God, so that I didn't curse and swear or complain when I, fell and bloodied my knees.
How free do you want to be? How soon? It's such a...
Yeah, it's right. Someone, asked me, who are you? I was at the Glacier View conference in August of 1980. My father was on trial, so the leaders of the Seventh-day Adventist Church had come together at this outside of Denver retreat, about 9,000 feet high. And first day we got there, I went jumping into the pool, and this older man, asked me, who are you? And I said, I am the son of the man you are crucifying. And when my dad got crucified at that conference, one of his supporters came over and said he would pay my way through medical school if I decided to go that route.
Powerful formula. I don't know how it works. I do know that it works. And the people who I've shared this experience with, who have embraced the methodology, praying specifically for the removal of a specific character defect and holding themselves accountable to somebody on a regular basis, experience the change.
So even though by about age 15 I wasn't much of a Christian, I still strongly identified with my dad's fortunes. So when my dad suffered, when my dad was excoriated, when my dad was criticized, it was an attack on me. And even though I became an atheist, I still saw my father as this heroic truth teller, this heroic figure. Then I went to UCLA and I adopted a virtual father in Dennis Prager. And then I came to see Dennis Prager is the epitome of what a father should be. And I began to virtually completely devalue my own father and think, how inferior he is to my idealistic conception of, Dennis Prager as my virtual father. So in the course of a few months, I went from, putting my father on a pedestal to putting my father in the trash heap. And that is my lifelong pattern. It's very common with narcissists. We tend to idealize and then devalue people. It's not often that narcissists, take people that they once devalued, but then idealize them. So one of the importance of situationism to me is recognizing that in different situations, people will shine or fail. If you think someone's heroic or just particularly great, you're really only seeing them in a particular situation, that there will be plenty of situations in which they're not going to thrive. So everybody hurts, everybody cries, everybody, fails and is vulnerable in different situations. That kind of helped me, I think, overcome my tendencies towards idealizing and devaluing people.
There's 6 characteristics of the pillars that Roger articulated right at the beginning of this process. Consciousness, self-acceptance, self-responsibility, self-assertiveness, purpose, integrity. And that seventh is willingness. I don't believe I need to comment on the tie to self-esteem. It's almost self-evident, but perhaps the panel will talk about the connections. Thanks.
Thank you, Herb. I'm going to bring in the other discussants at this point.
Hi, kids.
Evening. If we're kids, you must be dad. You must be pop. Hi, pop.
That's me. No, I think I'm the young one among us, aren't I? I think I'm the youngest guy here.
At this stage, I don't think we need to pursue this discussion.
Humbly asked him to shut his mouth. Is that it? Was that, did I misread the step tonight? Humbly asked him to shut his mouth so that we can get on with business.
That's no great shakes there, Tom. It's not.
Well, it's not. The four of us set the bar pretty low, anyways, in various ways. So we're good.
Humility here. Despite ourselves, there's some humility in the room.
Exactly.
Well, what a powerful process and experience you had, Herb. About, we've talked many times about the importance of being specific and really taking, ownership of that issue that was causing you so much grief and conflict. I mean, in your life, I have, I think, a unique position to understand the incredible suffering you had with that. I mean,
I'll take the mystery out of it. It was infidelity, and it was ruining my entire life in every aspect.
It was, and you were walking around just there was a phrase used called "torn to pieces" with, and that's what you were, man. You were torn to pieces. You could not have any real peace of mind.
So Alan Berger was like a step guide to Herb K early on in Herb K's recovery. So Alan Berger here, U.S. Marine, he was an alcoholic who got 12-step help in 1960s in Hawaii, became a psychologist, and then when Herb K was recovering in the mid-1980s, Alan Berger here played a significant role in his recovery.
Until you somehow dealt with that conflict inside of you. And it's so interesting because I had such a very similar experience with the obsession to drink and use and even smoke cigarettes. They all were lifted at the same time for me, right around the same time. And it was really, when I look back at it, it was exactly what you're talking about. I got to the point where I could really see it was time to change this behavior. And it wasn't just a result of my incredible intelligence or awareness or anything. I mean, it really was a result of the suffering. Is that I got to the point where I was really honest about the pain I was in.
Right, when the pain of continuing on the path that you're currently proceeding on is greater than the pain of changing, that's when you'll change. So as long as continuing on just doing the same old thing seems less painful to you than changing, you're going to just continue on doing the same old thing. But when the pain overwhelms you of your current habits, that's when you reach out for help. Usually most people have to get into their 40s before they look for help, such as from therapy or 12-step programs.
And, that phrase about being sick and tired of being sick and tired, I knew what that felt like. So, I really appreciate you being so open and vulnerable about that. And I hope it inspires some people here to be that honest with themselves about what's going on. You've got to name it if you're going to heal it. You got to name it. And so many people, I'll never forget Dr. Garrett O'Connor. He was just a very gift to psychiatry, to the recovery community. He was for many years the medical director at the Betty Ford Center and stuff like that. I went to a workshop he did in Santa Monica for the International Doctors and Alcoholics Anonymous. And he gave this whole presentation. At the beginning of the presentation, he said, with all the guys in here that are in recovery, will you raise your hands if you went to a massage parlor and got a happy ending? So there's 300 doctors in the room, right? About 10 guys raise their hand, right? 10 guys raise their hand. He gives this talk about honesty and stuff like that. At the end of it, he says, all right, now that I've talked to you guys about getting out, how many of you, 10 guys didn't raise their hand? And I mean, it was a remarkable thing that there's so much difficulty and shame in admitting certain things
So thank God I've never gotten a hand job or a blow job or gone to one of these illicit massage parlors, because I know I would just find it incredibly addicting. I've never directly paid for sex. I've never had a hooker or a masseuse to, wank me off, because I know I would love it way too much. And the notion that it was, always available. Ooh.
That have happened in our past or even in our current life in our recovery. And I'm telling you, when you share like this, man, you really open the door for people to take a look at it. So I wanted to just start out with an appreciation, and you demonstrated, you modeled the first part of the step, humbly asked, right, to have these shortcomings removed. And you really did that. I mean, that's the
Okay, some of my favorite thinkers on recovery there. That's it for now. I will be back in 3.5 hours. Bye-bye.